Oh, okay.
I'm on Zoom, and you can just go right from Zoom to YouTube. So
Cool.
um,
I thought you did your Patreon special stuff first.
well, it's going to be live, and it's going to be live, and I'm going to take it down.
Oh, wow.
We're really sophisticated over here, Richard.
Cool.
Let's see. Sorry,
Because you
guys.
could live stream it to like private, and then that way you could still have it there and put it on your other thing and make it available on YouTube whenever you're ready. But I'm not saying you should do that. It's an option.
I'm fine with it being public to start with. Let's see. Sorry, I've got like 5 places I'm gonna post this just because I want to get some attention on it. There's one. One more. Let's do one more. There, and then Twitter. Gotta get Twitter in there. Throw that in there.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, hi, Lance.
Hey, how's it going?
So yeah, just one more minute, and then I'll have you guys do introductions. I'll start recording.
Okay.
All right. This is funny because there's like I noticed that there's like a 40-second delay to the YouTube feed. So it's funny because I'm seeing both feeds, and I'm seeing one feed that's like 40 seconds back in time with Richard looking at the wall. All right.
Well, here you can look at my squishy brain I have.
That's right. Right.
Stress relief.
In case anyone was confused about where consciousness is. Sorry. Okay. All right, 1 second. I think we're good. All right, so now I'm going to hit record.
What is driving force?
Driving force. Oh, I build arcade machines.
Oh, cool.
So that's just like a marquee, like the light up marquees that sit on the top.
Oh, awesome.
All right, we're recording. So Lance, why don't you introduce yourself first? Richard needs no introduction, right?
Sure.
What did I do?
So I'm a PhD student at Cornell. I'm finishing up my PhD in social psychology. Before that, I studied philosophy. I went to Tufts, did a master's there, and then did philosophy and psychology as an undergrad. So my interests center on moral psychology, experimental philosophy, and metaethics. And I sort of just mash all that together into a particular area that I've been specializing in the past few years, which is the psychology of folk metaethics. So most of my research, I do other projects on the side, but most of my research focuses on this question of, if you go out there into the world and you look at what ordinary people are thinking and doing, do they think and speak like moral realists or moral anti-realists, and what are the details of that? So that's what I do my stuff on. So yeah, that's what I do.
Interesting.
So Richard, you might as well give her an introduction too.
Hi, I'm Richard. I have a PhD in philosophy from the City University, New York, the Graduate Center. I'm interested in metaethics and cognitive science, although I'm mostly work on issues related to consciousness and mind and foundations of cognitive neuroscience. I did my dissertation on metaethics, and I still like to think about these issues, but I guess I'm no longer one of the folk, but I certainly do remember being one of them. So I don't know how much I have to say, but I have to say I was impressed. I was reading a lot of your work, Lance. It's very, very interesting stuff.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, so sort of what motivated this conversation, or why I really wanted to see this happen, was Kane Baker, who's our friend. He kept telling me, I'm not even a real moral anti-realist. You have to talk to Lance Bush. He's a real moral anti-realist. I mean, Kane is a moral anti-realist, but he said Lance is even more extreme than I am. And I was thinking, that's very interesting. So, and then Richard, I think in our last conversation, said that he hasn't met a kind of realism he doesn't like. So I thought that would be a kind of fun jumping off point. So Richard, why don't you start with why you find moral realism appealing? Like,
Well, I don't know. It depends on what you mean by it. So,
Well,
I'd like to hear what
you mean by
what
it.
Lance has to say first.
Okay, all right,
Because
cool.
I want to know by what standard he's anti-realist, because I think that's the more interesting question. Because
Sure.
I mean, I just have pretty flat-footed views that, basically some moral truths. There's some moral truths. Some moral judgments are true. So, but I wonder what the opposition is, or what the opponent view is.
So Lance, you want to just break down a basic gist of?
Sure. Yeah. It's hard though to present a case for why I'm an anti-realist, because it's almost entirely a sort of reactive view to arguments for realism. So
I see.
the like roughly. So when I say I'm a moral anti-realist, what I mean by that is that I do not believe that there are stance-independent moral facts, specifically normative ones. I've met some people that think that there are moral facts, but they're not normative. I intend to deny specifically a certain kind of normative realism about moral facts in particular.
Uh-huh.
But
what do you? So what do you mean? But can I just interrupt you for a second? Because
sure.
So stance independence. Can you say what that means?
It's hard to give a really precise and satisfactory explanation, but very roughly, it's this idea that there are, with respect to normative facts, that there are facts about what we should or shouldn't do, or facts about, like, evaluative facts about what's good or bad, that are made true. They're like the truth makers for them are not our stances, our attitudes, our emotions, our beliefs. They don't depend on, for their truth does not depend on the standards of any person or group.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I definitely would deny that sort of view. But I mean, because what I'm trying to get a sense of is like where you're going to put constructivism in the range of things, because probably like I think of constructivism as a kind of normative view, as a kind of realism. Constructivism, not exactly like a Rawlsian kind, but more of like a Kantian kind or something in that tradition. But I wonder, like, on your reading, does that count as stance independent or not? So
I think probably not.
Uh-huh.
I think I would just consider it a type of anti-realism. I can imagine a constructivist
but why?
tries to like get well, because I don't think so. If we adopt some constructivist procedure for deciding on some set of moral facts, I don't think it becomes the case that I have the kinds of reasons that someone like Parfit might say that I have. So it wouldn't become the case if people use some constructivist procedure, or there's some hypothetical procedure, that it's true that I have a reason to say not torture babies for fun, independent of whether I want to or not. I still don't think you're going to get that with constructivism. And if you do, then I think
why not? Yeah, because I don't understand that. So it depends. Like, if you mean like the veil of ignorance, or like the procedure thing that you're talking about. But you consider like, or the Kantian approach, universalization, or looking for a contradiction in the principle that you're trying to act under. Where's the problem with those sorts of things?
Well, so this is why I said it's hard to articulate an argument, because my argument is that there's all these things out there, and I don't think I haven't been convinced by any of them. But in order to respond to one, I would need to hear someone present it to me so that I could then respond to it specifically. It's very hard to give like a general argument, because I would be arguing against some account of constructivism that might not be an account that you would consider plausible. So
that's true.
This is why I have to like hear the argument and then go, okay, here's what I make of that. And what has happened in practice is when I've read arguments for some particular type of realism, or I've discussed it with people, or I've heard arguments wherever I encounter them, I don't find any of them convincing. And of course, it doesn't mean that there isn't a convincing one out there. I just haven't run into it yet. And if you spent years looking at this and you haven't run into one, it's kind of because it's just like this sort of brute inductive argument. As far as I know, there aren't any good ones. I'm prepared to hear one, but I'm not going to like.
So what's the problem with the general line of reasoning that starts with the roughly the kind of things that I've already been stressing, the Kantian sorts of things, like with respect to practical agency? So I'm an agent. I make plans. I value myself as a decider amongst the things and projects that I want to pursue. I chose to get a PhD in philosophy and not to become a professional musician, mostly because I'm not very good, but I could have tried harder and stuff like that. We conceptualize ourselves as agents acting for reasons. And that very idea in and of itself, I think already is enough to get you some basic moral facts from reasoning from the way we think of ourselves pre-reflectively.
How does it do that?
Well, I conceive of myself as an agent acting for reasons. It seems to me important and valuable that I am able to select from the projects for reasons that I find important, to pursue the projects that I find interesting, valuable, worthwhile, etc. And the thing which I find valuable is had by you as well. So it seems irrational to value it in my case and to recognize that you have something indiscriminate, I won't say identical, but something that's the same, and yet to say that it's not valuable. It's just inconsistent. Yeah, so it just seems like starting with facts about agency, very quickly you arrive at some general maxims about what you ought to do, that you ought not to, kill a baby for fun or to burn someone alive for the reading a light. And those are very general, but they certainly seem to be within the realm of things to start from.
So would it be inconsistent for me to care about my interests and not care about anybody else's?
Yes.
What's the inconsistency?
So you don't have to care about their particular interests. So if I like chess and you like basketball, then it's not inconsistent for me to say, I don't care about basketball. In fact, I'm not very interested in it, even though there are elements of strategy there. I just don't find it very interesting. But there's nothing inconsistent about that. But what would be inconsistent is if I said, don't tell me I can't play chess, but you better stop playing basketball. I don't like it.
What's the inconsistency?
The inconsistency is that I'm insisting that something is valuable in my case, but denying it's valuable in your case when there are no relevant differences between the two things. From an objective standpoint, they are indiscernible.
So I'm a little puzzled by this notion of valuable. So I value things, but if I say that they're valuable, that just means that I value them. I don't think that things are valuable independent of me valuing them.
Right. We could debate that, but that's kind of not the point. The point is that you do the valuing. And,
right, but I don't care about other people's values. And I don't see an inconsistency. I value things and other people value things. And there's no inconsistency. Like if I like baseball and someone else likes basketball, it can also be the case that I like other people. Like, I don't even know which one I said. I like baseball, other people like basketball. I can just value other people not playing basketball. And now I'm going to just go, I value stopping people from playing basketball. And so that's what I value. I don't see an inconsistency there.
The inconsistency is that the source of the value is, so it's like if I had $100 bill and you had $100 bill, but I insisted that only mine was valuable.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, but that's irrational. So
why?
How is your money counterfeit? Like, what is the difference?
No, I just value money that's mine and I don't value money that's yours.
It's not about valuing, it's about it being valuable and
I don't think
monetary worth in the economy. So if my $100 can buy n number of goods at the store, then so can yours. And it would be irrational to say, well, yours is good, but yours is not. You can buy this bread with your money, but you can't. That's irrational because there's no difference between the money that you can appeal to and say, I will accept this, but not that.
But there is a difference. Some of the money is mine. So this money's mine, that money's yours. I can just value my money and not value your money. I don't have to value my money because of...
Then you can't value your own money because the source of its value is being denied.
Well, but there's a difference between some sort of intersubjective agreement between us to treat or regard money as like $100 bill as worth $100 and me just caring about the money that's mine. I can
We're
care
not
about
talking
my
about you
money.
caring about the money that's yours. We're talking about you, like why you care about it.
I can just care about it. It could just be a brute psychological fact about me. I don't think
can-
it's I don't
well,
think
that's
you can like you could just value one thing and not value another thing. I think it's kind of a category.
yeah. So
mistake.
brute psychological facts are the definition of irrationality. It's like, yes, exactly. So it could just be brute that you just have this weird quirk, and that could be a fact, but that's not. So what? That's not the point. The point is that's irrational.
What
So
do you mean by
great.
irrational?
What I mean is inconsistent, accepting and denying the very
I'm
same
denying it's
thing.
inconsistent. I'm not seeing an inconsistency.
The inconsistency is that in your case, you think the thing has value.
So
But
I'm
you don't
denying
think-
that. I don't think that. I don't think that. I value it. I don't think it has value. I'm just denying that. I don't think that the way
so
you're
you don't
using
think
have
your
value.
own
I don't
autonomy
think.
has any value?
No, I
Oh,
value things,
see.
but I don't think things have value. I don't think value is a property of the thing. I think value is an attitude I have about the thing. I don't think.
Yeah,
things
but that's
have value.
just a mistake. So in
Well, it's a
order to
mistake.
value anything, you must assume that the valuer matters, that your choices matter. Otherwise, why make them?
Nope, I don't think that. I don't think I matter.
You don't think you matter.
No,
Then
I value
why-
things. I don't think I have value. I don't know what that would mean.
Okay. Cool.
So I think
so
valuing
I'm
is a
talking
sort of,
about your choosing between alternatives. You don't think it's valuable that you're able to choose between alternatives?
no.
Okay. Cool. A lot of people do, and the ones who do can reason from that to the conclusion I have offered. So if you don't think it's valuable, then I will just enslave you, and you won't really seem to care because it's not valuable that you are.
No, I would
autonomous.
care. I don't.
No, you
want
wouldn't.
to
You
be
just said
enslaved.
it's not valuable. So you
No,
wouldn't
I
care.
don't. But I'm like telling you that I do. I would not want to be enslaved. That doesn't mean that I.
But that's
value.
inconsistent. What you're saying is inconsistent. I hate to. break it to
There's
you,
a
but,
presupposition that inconsistency turns on, like if I consider something as having value and another thing as not having value, and there's no differences between
and
them.
there's
But
no
I'm
difference between them.
Right,
Then
but I'm
there's
denying
no-
that things have value in the sense that you're using the term anything for anybody. And just because someone says
But
that
that's
they
not
think
true
things-
because practically you act differently. You make choices. You say, I'd rather do this than that. If someone tries to stop you, say, hey, who the hell are you to try to stop me? And so the overall interpretation of your actions is at odds with what you're saying to try to win this argument.
I don't see how. So
Well, because you make choices, you pick between alternatives, you become indignant if someone tries to stop you. You say, hey, you can't do that.
Well,
you say, things like, why
Richard, can I
shouldn't
ask
be
you a
allowed
que-
to do that, and so forth and so on.
Richard,
So this is the kind of the Kantian point. Every person in acting is already committing themselves to this view. And you haven't really said anything
Richard.
except, no, I'm not. And I haven't seen.
right.
any
I don't.
evidence.
You could say that people are doing this, but you would have to show that this is the case. I'm
No,
saying
you
I
have
don't
to
think
show
it
that
is.
it isn't the case.
I don't think so. I don't think
Well,
the
that's
burden's on
where-
me to show that something's not the case.
All
You'd
right,
have to
well,
show that
it
it
was nice
is.
talking with you. Then.
Wait,
Because,
Richard,
that's about all there is to say.
can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
So, Richard, could I give you, I don't know, I guess like an example. So like, I mean, obviously I'm a weird person. I'm not like probably like a typical person, but like, I don't see myself as an agent or my well-being coming from things that I do. I think that my well-being sort of just intrinsically occurs. Like, and it doesn't come from goals that I do or things that I achieve. It just comes from reality being how it is. Like I set up my goal. My goal is that reality be however it is, and then I get well-being. That's like the way I structured my source of
What's
well-being.
well-being?
Just feeling great. just like I don't know, maybe a brute psychological fact, like Lance would say.
Yeah, but
yeah.
great, good. I mean, great.
So no, but what I'm saying is that it's just like, I'm just trying to say, like, why do things have to be structured in terms of like an agent doing things, and that's how like suffering is avoided? Because I feel like, I mean,
Oh, I
isn't
was
it the
just saying
case?
that when you do
Yeah.
something, you do one thing and not the other. That's a fact.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. So that's it. That's all that we need. The rest you don't want to describe it as agents, whatever, but you make choices. Something happens and you eat the cookie or don't eat the cookie, or stab the guy or don't stab the guy, or whatever the case may be.
So you don't even think it's contingent on like what causes suffering, what doesn't? It's the source. Is there some other kind of source in the Kantian model, or?
I mean, I think you can kind of derive the suffering stuff from the things we're talking about here, but I mean, I'm not a utilitarian if that's what you're asking, but I'm not against utilitarianism.
Yeah,
it could be an answer to the sorts of things we're talking about,
but you think, I'm sure you think that what causes suffering, not in terms of being a utilitarian, but what causes suffering seems to dictate somewhat what we find moral or immoral. Like would seem kind of odd if we just discounted suffering from the equation of what we consider to be moral, right? So obviously,
sure.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, if you have an odd view of, what can cause your suffering, what doesn't, like what produces well-being, can your model capture it, or does your model only capture people who have, I guess, like normal like states you would consider psychologically normal? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a model. I mean, I'm just kind of talking about what I think of as like traditional philosophical arguments. So this is, like I said, just kind of coming from Kant. What I was running was one kind of argument, which I think gets you not maybe every moral fact, but it gets you some kind of claims to some moral objectivity, namely that persons act in certain ways that are logically inconsistent with the denial of other person's freedom. And that's just, I don't know, it seems pretty clear to me that you saying you don't think it's the case doesn't really make it not the case. But and saying I think I conceive of myself differently or chop up the landscape differently, I don't know. So this is what we do. And people become indignant for these reasons. So what are you supposed to say about it? It seems that if you then try to stop someone else from doing something without good reason, I'm not saying it can't be overridden, but at least prima facie, you have to have some reason to impede somebody else's goals when you don't want anyone impeding your own. It just is just like logically inviolable. I don't see where you get out of it at. So
I don't understand why though. So it could just be a fact. So you could just make an agent. Like I create an agent, and the agent, it has one goal: maximize the amount of paper clips in the universe. And so when it goes about doing that goal, it encounters humans on Earth, and it's like, all right, these would make good paper clips. So it just kills people and turns them into paper clips. I don't see how it's doing anything irrational. Now,
well, it's not rational at all. What you've described isn't a rational agent.
Well, I think all agents are like this. I think we simply have goals, and then we act in accordance with their goals.
Yeah, but that's manifestly false, since I am not that. So all of us aren't that.
Well,
you so don't. It doesn't. I mean, maybe some of us are, but at least one of us isn't.
Well, that's how I act. I have various goals and desires, and then I just act in accordance with those. I don't know how else to act.
Well, you could deliberate and reflect and try to adjust your desires and wonder what you ought to do, and whether that's in accord with what you are doing and or what you have done, and whether in the future you ought to behave in that way again, and things of that nature, which seem to be sort of part of what moral reasoning and reflection are all about. So if you're not interested in that sort of stuff, then I don't know what the.
Well, I'm interested in reasoning about how to better achieve my goals, but that's the only thing I'm interested in. I'm not interested in anything else. And if someone that is interested in moral reflection,
but you ought to be.
Yeah, but
so whether you are or not, whatever, but you ought to be. That's clear.
So I ought to be interested in this procedure. Why? I don't want to.
Yeah, but that's regardless of the that you
right. But then I would want to hear why I ought to.
Well, do you want to be rational, or do you not care about reason?
Well, it depends what you mean by rationality. So for me,
do you accept contradictions and be cool with it, or do you want to not have contradictions in your belief system?
I don't think that's a part of rationality.
well, then we disagree pretty strongly on that.
Right. So, I just see rationality as like the way I would construe it is some sort of means ends relation. So what would be rational is just to act in accordance like with the most effective way to
Yeah,
achieve
I don't
goals or
call that
desires.
rational. That's that's means ends deliberation. You can call that reasoning in some sense about how to get what you want. But I'm talking about just, rationality itself, like logic, reasoning. So it seems to me to be something that's good to avoid contradictory beliefs. That's a normative principle, which I accept. That's from governing like my belief system. So, if you don't seem to really care about that though. But if you don't accept that, then I don't think you're going to really.
I do care about it, but I care about it for instrumental reasons. So the reason I care about logic and like epistemic principles that reliably give me true beliefs is because that's generally conducive to my goals. But if there are circumstances where adopting some epistemic practice that would optimize for true beliefs or fully commit me to accepting, say, the conclusions of valid arguments or true premises, I wouldn't want to adopt that epistemic procedure if it was inconsistent with my goals. So for instance, if I could choose between one of two epistemic systems, one of them gives me 100 true beliefs and the other gives me 99 true beliefs and one false belief, but that false belief doesn't undermine any of my goals. Like it could be something like being selectively irrational in a certain sense about like how attractive I am or how much people like me. I just believe people like me more than they do. That can give me a certain sense of optimism and well-being without compromising my epistemic faculties in other domains. And so being a little, in other words, adopting an epistemic system.
Well, how would that be? How would that be inconsistency?
Well, I would be believing. Well, I don't know about a contradiction, but I would be adopting epistemic practices that cause me to believe something that's false. And if you go back in the chain of the like different sorts of arguments I accept, that might be inconsistent with some other argument that I accept, but I would be selectively ignoring that for the sake of my mental health or something. So like I value my well-being more than I value what's true. So under circumstances where something would make me worse off to know what's true, I'd rather just not know.
Cool. But I mean, you keep like reasoning from facts about yourself as though they're supposed to be like carry some weight or something. But the fact that you would do this or you would do that is like, I'm not sure what's the evidential weight of these anecdotal claims.
Oh, what I'm talking about is just what my goals and interests are. And I don't know, I'm not sure what you mean by the evidential weight of that. I'm just telling you what kind of rationality I care about, which is instrumental rationality.
Right. But
if there's some other kind of rationality,
that you don't care about the right kind is not really my problem, though. I don't understand why you're telling me this.
Oh, well, I think I don't recognize. Yeah, if I don't recognize it, then just saying that I'm not being rational.
Well, there's some people that are colorblind and you can't explain the colors to them. I don't know what else to tell you. If you really don't know what I'm talking about, then I guess that's what I said. I don't know what else to say.
Well, I mean, all it seems like you would be doing is saying that, like, if I go ahead and don't care about what's morally right or wrong, you're just like anointing that like a folk terminological label. That's not rational. But,
no, it's actually, you can demonstrate the logical inconsistency in that you're accepting as valuable and denying as valuable the very same thing. And that is, or valuing and also not valuing the very same thing. So that's fundamentally irrational. There's no like if, ands, or buts about it.
Two things. One is I don't think that that's true, but even if
it is true, though. You haven't said any reason why it's not true. What you said is
I don't think you've
the thing is the same at the abstract level, which is what you're sort of the thing is the same at the abstract level, and there's no difference between the two that makes a difference. So all you've said in response to that is you don't care about that.
No, that's not what I said. I said I don't think you've. No, it's not. I said that I deny that you've demonstrated an inconsistency. You seem to be asserting that there's an inconsistency, but I'm not recognizing one.
Right. I know you're not recognizing it, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
Well, maybe you're right, but unfortunately, if I don't understand you, I can't respond to the force of the argument.
Yeah, but you don't need to.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
So
the inconsistency is pretty clear. It's that you're counting as valuable and denying as valuable the same thing, which is the doing of your own project.
I'm not.
It's
so
just that
like I value my
your-
projects
I
and
would
I
just
don't value
finish
other
for
projects.
1 second though. To complete the thought, the your project bit is indexical, so your project's not their project, but at the abstract level, valuing your project is the important thing, and that's the same. And if it's you're valuing your project, then you have every reason to think that them valuing their project is indiscernible from their point of view as you from your point of view. So there's no reason that you can give why you would be justified just on the basis of that they're not you to stopping what they're doing. You'd have to justify in some other reasons, suffering, harm, blah, 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 duty, blah, blah, blah. But I don't, yeah, so I don't, so you say it's not the same thing because their projects aren't your projects and what they care about isn't what you care about, but it's the caring about stuff, the doing of things, the projects themselves, whether they're different or not. That's what we're trying to talk about. So that's why I just keep not understanding really what your response is or why you're saying you don't see the inconsistency.
Well, I mean, you're saying they're not discernible, and then it sounds like you're discerning them. So like I have my projects, other people have their projects. I care about mine. I don't care about theirs. I'm just not understanding what the inconsistency is.
The inconsistency is that, so you don't have to care about their projects. That I guess maybe that's what we're miscommunicating on, because I'm not saying that you have to care about their projects. What I'm saying is that you at least have some minimal duty to give a reason to override their project or to stand in their way.
Why would I have that duty?
Because in your own case, you would demand that from anyone else.
Even if I would, I'm not sure that I would, but even if I would, why would it follow that I would have to be consistent about that?
Well, you don't have to be consistent. That's the point. But if you value rationality, and if rationality is an important constraint for you, then you ought to.
I don't know what you mean by rationality. So
what I mean by rationality is not accepting contradictions.
So I don't think it's a contradiction.
Conversation.
I don't think it's a contradiction. So I care about what I care about. I don't care about what you care about. I don't want you to impose on my projects. I do want to impose on your projects.
Right.
What's the contradiction?
The contradiction is that you don't, in the reason you don't want someone to impede you. Well, I don't know. What would be that reason?
I simply don't want them to.
So you just have a fundamentally irrational, unjustified desire, and that's all you can say.
No, I don't think desire, I don't think it's a category mistake to call a desire irrational. I could just a desire is just a psychological fact about me. In the same way, like
I disagree. You can justify your desires. You can say in virtue of what is desirable. And you can say you ought to desire it or you ought not to desire it. I think that we can evaluate these things, and these things are thick normative concepts. So it seems like you want to deflate all of these things and I don't know. You could do that. I don't see what the reason to do it is. And you haven't really given a reason. All you've said is that you want to like debate every person who thinks the opposite, but you can't give any sort of unified reason for thinking anti-realism in this sense that you've defined as true. Whereas I've been trying to say that one of the reasons for thinking that it's false is that it makes better sense of like what people actually do, like when they're walking around in the world. And you want to be saying, no, I can reinterpret all of that in some way that's not doing that. So I don't know. I mean, so even if that's the case, what I would say is that it seems wrong to do that. And even if you are the way that you say that you are, even if I am that way, and I don't think I am, I certainly would like to change that. And I would like to use the neuroscience and cognitive neurosciences generally to build the sort of thing that I'm speaking about, something that values rationality in the way that I'm depicting it. And even if we aren't those sorts of creatures, I think that they are worth making. So yeah, I agree. So ultimately, whether actual human beings have the sort of psychology that we're discussing is not, I mean, even if they didn't, then I would say we would want to bring that sort of creature into existence.
Is it because you think that this project just transcends humanity in general? Like the Rationality project is something you see as like a transcend, like something that is not specific to our species. It will continue on, and artificial intelligence and things of that type. So like it's focusing on human psychology is just irrelevant.
I don't know if it's irrelevant, but certainly I don't think that. But I don't think you're going to answer any normative claims by studying humans' brains. I mean, so it's like saying these people have brains that function like that. It's like, okay, that's great. I mean, Lance probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but the whole debate about prefrontal cortex damage the patients and utilitarian judgments and blah, blah, blah. And what's that supposed to tell us about, is utilitarianism a theory of that only psychopaths endorse, or you had to be brain damaged to really find it plausible? You see headlines like that. I don't think those things are very plausible conclusions from the studies that were run, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I do want to say, though, you're describing my position as some type of reinterpretation, and it feels like you're treating your position as having some sort of primacy, or it's just sort of a default against which I would have to argue. And if that's
people
the case,
act this way, that's the default.
Well, people
this is what people do.
People act what way?
They make choices, they choose things, they ask people to stand out of their way, they become indignant when people roll over them, they fight for their autonomy and so forth. That kind of way.
Right. Okay. So if I were to try to describe that, I would just describe the psychological facts about people and the sort of what causes them to have those desires. So there's going to be like these evolutionary explanations for like what natural selective forces led to people having the structure of the brains that they do. We could look at the sort of like social psychological facts, the cognitive psychological facts. And then once you've explained those, I don't think there's anything left to explain. I don't know at what point in explaining human behavior we would need to invoke this idea of rationality that you're describing, that, or any type of like any sort of stance.
I don't know. Some people think it's sort of important, like Quine, not to name drop or anything, but some people have like Davidson, Quine, and that whole tradition. And I don't necessarily agree with them, by the way, but I think that there's certainly a philosophical lineage here that says that to even like make sense of other people, you have to interpret them as being rationally consistent, and to even assign thoughts to you, I have to interpret you in a way that tries to make logical sense of the widest swath of your behavior and intentional states and so forth. So you could disagree with that, but I think that it's not obviously false that that people don't accept contradictory things, and that's a folk psychological thing. That's just like when someone says, I mean, just commonsensically, when someone acts this way, we try to interpret what they're saying in a way that makes sense of them. And it's only as a last ditch effort that we say, well, they must be believing P and not P. It must be the case that they accept it and deny it at the same time. But that, and usually we would find some way that they did so unwittingly. They didn't really, even you in the little story you told, said, well, I may not have known that this line of reasoning conflicted with some other argument that I accepted, so that the contradiction was implicitly in the system, but not formally recognized. But if you drew it out and saw it sitting there, aha, this and not this, then you said, I don't care. I just don't think that's the way that people act. It's just not what people do. Like, you can debate that, but you can do some X-Phi on that. I don't think that this is people really evince these attitudes that you're describing.
But you're saying I'm describing these attitudes, and that's not my perspective. As I've said, I'm denying that so like, while I have said I'm fine with having inconsistent beliefs if it's instrumental towards achieving my goals, I've consistently denied that if I value what I care about and I don't value what other people care about, that is an inconsistency. I know
you've denied it, but I don't see the basis for the denial.
Well, I don't see the basis for saying it's true. And
well, they're the same in the respect that you are valuing certain projects. So the valuing of the project, which is different, the projects are different, but the you valuing the project part is the same. So what don't you get about that?
I don't understand what you mean by it's the same. I value my projects. I don't value other people's
The
projects.
valuing, not the thing you value.
But it's just a psychological state about me that I value my projects. And it's a
it's
psychological state about me that I do not value other people's projects. Those are just
right,
two
but
facts
then it
about
can
my
also
psychology.
be a psychological fact about you that you're irrational. I don't
Right,
see
hold
what
on,
the point
but
is.
it's like I'm just telling you two psychological facts about me. It's like I like
Yeah,
cheese
and
and I
may-
like milk, and that's not a contradiction. So
It
I'm
may
giving you
be
two
a
facts. I
contradiction
don't
given
see,
certain other facts.
But what are the
you
other
have
facts?
To, and you have to, well, I've already demonstrated what the other facts are. The other
I don't
facts
think that
are
you have.
that the valuing on the other side of the meat divide is identical to yours.
It's not
So
identical though.
It
It's
is
not mine.
identical.
So
Well,
it's
in
not
what way
identical.
is it not identical to
It's
yours?
not
It's not
mine.
numerically identical, but phenomenologically, whatever you want to call it, psychologically, it's the same kind of state.
No, I have my psychological states. They have theirs. Those are different psychological states.
They're numerically
the same.
different, but they are psychologically the same. If human beings are a natural kind, and if minds are a natural kind, then if perception is a natural kind, I don't know. So if you want to deny all that stuff, I guess you can.
No. I'm not denying any of that. I'm saying I have a psychological state, and that
Right.
psychological state is a fact that I value things.
So look, listen,
And-
hold on though. So suppose that you're looking at a red tomato and I'm looking at the same red tomato, and I have a psychological state, which is a conscious experience of a certain shade of red. And you look at the same tomato and you have an experience of a shade of red. Correct or not correct?
Sure.
Okay. So in some respect, those are the same kinds of experiences, given that they are experiences of a certain shade of red. So there may be differences amongst persons and what shade exactly it is, who cares? But insofar as it is an experience of a certain shade of red, there is a commonality between the two perceivers. It is at that level of commonality that I'm trying to pitch this argument.
So they have values and I have values. I agree that they're valuing things and I'm valuing things, and
Yes.
those are similar.
Right.
I could even say they're the same type of thing. They're values, but
Yes.
it does not follow that if I value something that I don't like value my values, so I don't have to value anything that's a value. So I don't.
You don't value your values.
No,
you
they just
value.
are
I guess,
values.
yeah. Why don't you value valuing?
What I don't even know what that would mean. I just
It
have
would
values.
mean that you find it valuable that you can pick amongst the alternatives.
Well, take like preferences. Like I have food preferences. I don't prefer to have my food preferences. I mean, I could, but I don't. I just have food preferences. I don't think I have to prefer my food preferences. I can just have food preferences. And I think that just generalizes to value. I just have values. I don't value my values. I just have values. That's just a fact.
But I'm not saying that you
psychology.
value your values. What I'm saying is that we value autonomy. And so what that
But okay, but I don't. I value my goals and interests. I don't value other people's autonomy.
I didn't say other
about
people's autonomy. I said your own.
Okay, I don't think that I do value my autonomy, but if I do value my
that's
autonomy,
great.
it wouldn't
mean,
follow that
yeah.
I value other people's autonomy. There's not
and
an
you would have
inconsistency
to.
about caring about myself. Why though? Why? Okay, I value my autonomy. Why would I have to care about other people's autonomy in virtue of that fact?
Because it's the same as yours.
It's not though. It's not mine.
Yeah, and that doesn't matter.
It matters to me.
That's like saying Brazil isn't here, so it doesn't matter.
No, I could just not value Brazil though.
Yeah, great, but that's not the point. Like, Brazil isn't here, so it's not anywhere. It's not there. It can't be there.
But I'm not saying what I'm saying is not analogous to that.
It's pretty much analogous to it. You're saying that what reason would you have to find valuable the thing which you find valuable in yourself?
No, I'm not asking what reason. I'm just saying it's a fact about me that I don't value it. I don't think it makes sense. So you said earlier that you think that there's facts about what we should value or not, something like that. I just don't think that there are. I don't even know what that would mean.
Well, I'm not sure I said exactly what you just said, but Okay, I'm not sure why it matters that you understand what it would mean, though. I mean,
well,
what you said basically is that you're colorblind, and so what I'm thinking to myself is, why would I argue about colors with a colorblind person, trying to convince you that red, there are things called red and green, and what you're saying is, I don't see why anyone would say that there is red and green. And I'm saying, yeah, I don't know either, but I can't. If we can't get past that initial point, then there's nowhere to go.
I don't think there is. I feel like we're going in circles.
Yeah, I know.
Hey,
what I'm saying.
Lance, why do you could you give an account for, like, now obviously I don't like I'm not a fan of appeals to consensus, but I do want to know, Lance, why do you think that moral realism is a consensus amongst philosophers? Like, what's your account of that?
Why it's a consensus?
Yeah, why do you think it's a consensus?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by consensus. There's like a slight majority at 62%. I think that's probably due in part to self-selection effects, probably having to do with the sort of sociology and history of philosophy. So you saw the sort of resurgence in realism a few decades ago, and I think that we're still seeing the reverberations of that. Some of that is probably a healthy overcorrection for the tide of behaviorism in psychology and the linguistic turn in philosophy, and this, like, logical positivism and all that sort of stuff. I think as people stepped away from that, they returned to they wanted to secure a more autonomous domain for like a priori reasoning and philosophy to do its work without trying to graft it so closely to the sciences. And so I think that some sort of sociological and historical facts about what's been happening in philosophy have led it to sort of go back probably to what it was before the early 20th century. So I think it's more, I think the current majority in favor of realism is probably a more accurate depiction of what philosophers would have thought prior to the early 20th century. I think the reasons why people are attracted to it are in part deep psychological reasons that are shared among human beings. I think there are certain features of our psychology, our thought processes, our phenomenology that incline people towards realism on consideration under certain circumstances. And then I also think that there's a significant cultural element to it. So you have this strong influence of Western philosophy and Judeo-Christian religion. Judeo-Christian religion in particular inherited this sort of Manichaean, like good and evil, cosmic sense that there's like this dichotomy between what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. And I think that the cultural influences of those have permeated academic philosophy largely because it's dominated in like by the Anglophone world and Western Europe, which is saturated in Christian thinking. I suspect, and I think there's empirical evidence to support this, that if you look out broader in the world outside of Western Europe and the academic traditions of Western philosophy, what you'll find is a much more diverse and unusual picture. So for instance, there's been some recent work, I wouldn't call it experimental philosophy, but it's basically looking at whether or not the Mongolian language has cognate terms for moral terms and concepts. And it looks like they don't map super duper well onto the Mongolian language and the way Mongolians think about things. It does not mean that Mongolians don't have moral standards by some sort of external description, like rules against murder and stuff like that. It just means that if you ask them to categorize normative issues within that culture, it's going to look different than it would if you asked like a conventional person in Western society. And it turns out that this seems to be the case in a wide range of different cultures. So Edouard Mastery has an ongoing project. I think it's called the Geography of Philosophy. And one of the things that they're looking at is categorizing norms in different cultures. And what they're finding is that if you basically give people a big list of norms and ask them whether they're moral or not, you don't get a whole lot of consensus between cultures. And there's also is research that continues to show that you don't get consensus within like even just Americans. So Jen Wright has some research on this, where what she did is she just asked people to categorize issues as moral or not. Turns out even participants in the same study from the same culture that are native speakers of the same language are really inconsistent with which sorts of things they categorize as moral. Now, that does not mean that these people have this distinct concept of morality and they really do think of morality in different ways. A lot of that is probably an artifact of experimental design. So it's not one thing to be wary of with experimental philosophy and empirical research generally is a very high risk that the participants are not understanding the questions as intended. So I think that when experimental philosophers have been quick to say these different cultures actually have different philosophical concepts, which I want that to be true because it's consistent with my philosophical worldview. I have a bias in favor of thinking that. I've actually stepped in and said that I am very skeptical of those findings, in spite of the fact that I want the results to be true for methodological reasons. And like one of these is what I call interpretive variation. So you have this problem where you could give a question to people and you get this pattern of responses where it's like bimodally distributed. It looks like most people cluster towards one end or the other end of a continuum. And then you might think, there's these two different philosophical concepts in society. So philosophy has a problem because there isn't a shared folk concept. That doesn't necessarily follow. The problem could be that that bimodal distribution is due to an ambiguity in the question, and then people sort of just bimodally break in one or another direction. So to give an example, imagine you ask people whether they like going to the bank. If you ask a group of people, and let's say it's like by a fishing village, so a lot of them actually have a riverbank nearby, but there's also a bunch of banks in the town. It could be that like half of them think you're asking about going to a financial institution, and half of them think that you're asking about going to the river. And so half of them say yes and half of them say no. And you think, and you thought you were asking about the financial institution, and you're like, look, half the people don't like going to the financial institution. It's not true. Actually, 100% of people like going to the financial institution, or maybe 0% do. And really what's happening is it's just half your participants thought that's what you're asking about, the other half didn't. So researchers have not been really attentive to understanding whether participants in these studies are interpreting philosophical questions the way they intend. This is probably because they're sort of importing the methods used in conventional social scientific research, which often for social psychologists doesn't involve a whole lot of pre-testing to ensure people are understanding the questions. Because if you ask someone like, do you like bananas? Like they know what you're asking them, or do like, here's a picture of a person, do you think they're attractive? People, they're not going to be totally confused about what you're asking. But if you ask someone a question about like compatibilism, and you're like, imagine a universe where all antecedent, so all events are caused by antecedent things deterministically, blah, 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 blah. And there are studies like this that give people like full paragraphs. I just looked at a study where there's a 750 word description, and then you expect people to understand that. They just don't. They interpret it in all different sorts of ways, and then the pattern is just, it's nonsense. So anyway, sorry.
That was like your example of the shooting the gun in the crowd. That's a
exactly. Yeah. So we should tell people about that one. So they ask people to consider a moral disagreement. So you ask all the participants, hey, consider this case of a person opening a gunfire into a crowd of people. Do you think that would be morally right or wrong? Of course, people are going to be like, it's morally wrong. It's a crazy question to ask. Hopefully. I should look at the data to see if some people disagree with that. So you ask people that, they say it's wrong, hopefully. And then you say, hey, in a previous study, we found a person that actually thinks it is morally okay. What do you think the source of disagreement could be? Now, the presumption, in order for that to be a valid test, so here's what the test is supposed to show is if you say we could both be correct, it's both correct to shoot into the crowd and not shoot it in the crowd, that's interpreted as like a denial of objectivism. The person's a relativist because they think two different moral standards could both be true. And if they say the other person's got to be wrong, or weirdly, they could say I'm wrong and the other person's right. Why would you say that? But that was an option. Nope, I don't think hardly anyone picked it. That's weird. Anyway, if you think one of you is right, you're like a realist or an objectivist, however you want to use the terms. If you think you're both right, you're a relativist. The problem is, in order to have that work, to be a valid measure, you would have to understand both people to have a genuine moral disagreement. They actually have to disagree on the normative moral facts. But that's not how some of the participants interpreted it. When they looked at that, they're like, and think about it, you're expecting the person to treat this scenario like a philosopher. Like, yeah, suppose there was a person that thought it was okay to fire in a crowd of people. That's not like normal people don't think that way. You ask them, hey, you ask them the scenario and you tell them this other person thought it's okay. They're thinking, why would someone think that? Maybe they thought it was police shooting at terrorists. And that's actually what one of the participants said. So now they're saying, well, I was thinking of police shooting at terrorists. I was thinking of terrorists shooting at police or random people. That's wrong. They were thinking of police shooting at the terrorists. That's right, or at least permissible. So we're both right. But why are we both right? We're both right because we're thinking about different moral scenarios. That's not evidence of relativism, because it's just, of course, two different moral propositions could both be true. Doesn't mean you're a relativist. So that was a problem with that study, and that's just one of the problems. There's another problem. I don't know if we talk about it in that paper. If you tell people this, Alex thinks that Julius Caesar drank wine on his 21st birthday. Sam thinks Julius Caesar did not drink wine on his 21st birthday. Do you think they're both correct? Or does at least one of them have to be mistaken? You actually get about 45-50% of people. I think the studies, it was in several different populations. You get slightly less than half saying they could both be correct. Now, from our point of view, that might sound ridiculous. Wait, so people are relativists about history? No, it's because I suspect what's called a modal operator scope ambiguity. they're not understanding that whether the claims are inclusive or exclusive of whether they could both be right. So you could interpret it as either one of them is right or the other is right. So sure, they could both be right, just they couldn't both be right at the same time. So the problem is that the question, when you ask a question that sounds crazy, like could an historical event both have occurred and not occurred, the natural reaction of a participant is to think, well, you couldn't be asking that because that's a contradiction. Right. That's silly. So you must be asking if either one of them could turn out to be right, independent of the other. Like one of them is right and the other's wrong, or that one's right and the other's wrong. That's a perfectly natural interpretation of it. And the problem is that typically with these sorts of questions, what determines whether there's an inclusive or exclusive reading of like, could they both be right? Like, in other words, could it be that both A and B, or could it be that A or B, but not both? Is typically fixed by pragmatic or contextual information that a person has in the background. So the example I tend to give is if I say, hey, could the Yankees and the Red Sox both, like let's say they're going to the World Series, could they both win the World Series? People might say, well, no, because it's either one or the other, but not both. But if I say, could Alex and Sam both have cereal for breakfast? You would think, well, sure, there's no reason to think there's only enough cereal for one of them. But imagine you knew there's only enough cereal for one person and they're not going to try to split it. Just they're going to have it as the serving. Could Alex and Sam both have cereal? Well, now, no, because there's only one. Right. So typically people use pragmatic information. And the problem with a lot of these studies is that they don't give any pragmatic information and they're decontextualized. So there's no contextual cues to fix the meaning of what the question is asking. So the question is asking something that's indeterminate. And then it's expecting people to give a determinate answer. And of course, they're going to answer differently from one another because there's no fact of the matter about what the question is asking without context.
Yeah, I like that. I would just point out that in that interpretation that you're defending, it does seem that contradiction-freeness is something that people strive for and that we aim towards in our own psychology. And in fact, that we use to interpret other people. And so the sorts of things that we were discussing earlier seem to be implicit in the background of that critique. Because one thing you're not saying is, oh, hey, did you know that people are dialethists and they just, they don't give a shit about contradictions and they just say P and not P and they don't give a fuck and they go on with their lives. But you're not defending that view.
I like Grand Priest. I
like Grand Priest too, but even he doesn't defend that view. He defends the view that there are some true contradictions, but not that people go around believing contradictions all the time for fun.
I do think there's probably rare cases where people are aware of contradictions and they're okay with it, but I
like them a lot. I really like them. Yeah.
In your belief system, you like them, or in reality you like
them? Both.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I mean, what's funny though is that Lance, I'm sure maybe you're just not troubled by it at all. But Lance, maybe this is a psychological question, not even a moral question, but like, so your project as like a moral anti-realist and a moral critic, it's like supported by like the cooperation of all of society and like people sort of caring about is my audio muted?
No,
okay. So there's this whole project of society, like electricity running through your wherever you are right now, like, and people having to care about other people for you to kind of even exist. And like, do you think it's odd to, because I feel like there's almost like a methodological like egoism problem where it's like, well, what could you ever add to a conversation about how we like organize things or like do things in the world? Like, I mean, because we have to cooperate for society to continue, and it seems like your view or non-view just has absolutely nothing to like contribute in terms of us like actually doing anything. Like, so
I don't think my view has any practical differences from, maybe some realists would differ with me, but I don't think that there's any substantive differences. So I care about things, other people care about things, and what we could do, even if everybody was a selfish egoist, and I'm not a selfish egoist, I'm not selfish in a certain sense because I do care about other people. even if I didn't care about other people, there would still be these facts about what it would be reasonable for me to do, given what other people care about. In other words, if I want to achieve certain sorts of goals, the fact that other people might cooperate or oppose me is going to be relevant to how I go about achieving those goals. So you can imagine a sort of toy scenario where I'm on it. I get shipwrecked. I'm on an island with another person. They're on one side of the island where they got all the fish. I'm on the other side where we got all the coconuts. And I need the fish to survive. They need the coconuts to survive. Even if we were just psychopaths that wanted to kill everyone else other than ourselves, as long as our goal is like I don't want to die and I need those fish. Well, now it could be if I get in a fight with that person, maybe there's a 50-50 chance I die. And so just if I'm just trying to achieve my goals, I might say, hey, let's work out like a negotiation. Let's have a trade deal. You give me some fish, I'll give you some coconuts. And that could be reasonable from the point of view of a completely psychopathic egoist to cooperate with other people.
So it's like some sort of contractual like equilibrium that gets formed.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so given some specified set of values and goals that some set of agents have, I do think that there are facts about what would be most conducive to them sort of collectively optimizing for their individual goals. And it will generally be in the interest of an agent to act accordingly. But you could come into a scenario where I've got all the power. So, I'm the psychopathic egoist and the other person's asleep and I've got a rock and I could bash their skull and kill him. And I do the expected utility calculations and boom, the right thing to do, the right thing where the thing that's most consistent with achieving my goals is to bash the skull in and kill them. So, this is where I get off the boat with certain kinds of realist accounts, because from the perspective of that person, I consider it the completely rational thing to do, the thing that is consistent with this, pursuing their goals, to kill other people. That doesn't mean I want people killing other people. Because that's not what I value. I really don't want people to kill other people. I don't want there to be bad things to happen. And so, from my perspective, what we should be doing is saying, hey, we've all got different values. They fortunately mostly overlap. It's not like I have the value of kill everybody else and so does everyone else. Otherwise, we'd all be stabbing each other. We mostly have overlapping values. And then it's just a question of sort of practical negotiation. That's just that issue, that scenario with the fish and the coconuts, just on a grander scale. It's just that, expanded.
So Richard, when we talked with Kane, you kept going back to this example of there was a glass of water and somebody desired to pick up the glass of water, but they actually just would not act on it no matter what. So is that useful to bring in here? Like that kind of what you were saying to that whole sort of line of argument you were bringing to Kane when we talked? Do you think that would do anything to Lance?
No. I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to do to Lance. I mean,
I mean, like
I don't want to do anything to him. He seems like a nice guy and knows a lot of stuff, but I just disagree with this characterization of what rationality is. And even if it is correct, I certainly would fear a world of individuals described as we are envisioning them. And it doesn't seem to me to be a good thing if human psychology is that way. Certainly, I would strive to alter it in ways that more align with the things that I'm talking about. But I mean, what are you going to do? People disagree.
So Richard, let's say it was just found out that moral anti-realism was true definitively.
Yeah.
Do you think that prevents a compassionate society where people are loving and care about other people? Because it reminds me of like a kind of argument.
Yeah, exactly. You just described one. Lance just described a transactional society where every interaction is calculated, expect utility, etc. Where's the love and care in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, no, I understand. I'm just saying, like, there's an argument that religious people give about, you can't have morality without God. What are you talking about? And they say that you're like almost not allowed to have it. Like you can't love other people if God isn't a factor. So couldn't you also make an argument to a moral realist and say, like, I don't need any of that stuff. Like, I don't believe in any of that stuff, but I still give to charity. Like, I love people, and I don't take Lance's view because I feel, I mean, I'm a skeptic, not a realist or an anti-realist, but I don't, I give to charity. I volunteer with homeless people and animal shelters and things and I don't take a firm realist position, but I don't like that transactional point of view that Lance was talking about. I would not like a world like that, but I'm not sure that I need to believe a certain set of things to make that the case. Like, it seems like it could just be the case.
Yeah, I mean, so on the religion point, I think that I like Hobbes on this kind of point. So Hobbes, I think that if you go back in the history and you look at these early modern philosophers, what you find in a lot of their thinking is the distinction between, which I think is very important, and between what we might call motivating and justifying reasons. So some things they're both kinds of reasons for doing things. Some of the reasons can motivate you to do something, and some reasons justify what you're doing. So those are distinct. And so I've a lot of people want to criticize the kind of view that we're talking about because, of Hume's argument that you're not going to get like moral actions from just pure recognition of reason, because reason is kind of ineffectual or something like that. And I personally disagree with that. So I think that some of the things like Hobbes would say, Hobbes is famous for saying we want a strong oligarch or a leviathan, a strong ruler to enforce these psychopaths, to keep them the picture of reality that we were just talking about in line. Because hey, you know what? On that island, by the way, you can agree to not bash someone's brain in, but then as soon as they're asleep, Land starts doing expected utility calculations, and we're like, uh-oh. So what you really want, says Hobbes, is a strong ruler, someone that'll like kick the shit out of you if you break the rule that you just agreed to abide by. And that was the role. Now, of course, if there were a God around, that would be great, says Hobbes. But I'm an atheist, sadly, so we have to build one ourselves, and that's what the role of the ruler in the society or whatever is supposed to be doing, right? They're the ones who we entrust to make sure we don't go back on the justifying reasons we've all agreed to, because we can see that something is justified and not be motivated to do it. And because Hobbes thought psychologically fear was a motivator. And so that reason itself isn't really gonna, even if you came to the conclusion that, look, I said I would do it, therefore I'm obligated to do it, because I think that already minimally follows just from the fact that I said I will do it. It follows that I ought to do it unless I can find defeater reasons, just from the fact that I said I would, nothing else, just that, period. So, but nonetheless, it might not motivate me to do it. I may want to stay on the couch and watch, The Bachelor or whatever. So, but, there may be other motivating factors. So, anyway, I sort of lost where I was going with this, but I think that this distinction is something that's in my own thinking about this is important, because what I see is that why are we doing the things that we're doing? Are you motivated by duty? Are you motivated by, that's what Kant thought was important. You have to recognize that you ought to do this for it to even count as doing a good action. So even if you save someone, if you didn't do it out of a recognition that you ought to do it, then it wasn't morally valuable in some sense, according to Kant. Now, other people say, look, it doesn't matter. Maybe I did it because, I just enjoy jumping in that way. And it was exercise for me. And I just enjoy the stretching of my body. And yeah, I happened to push that person out of the way of mortal harm, but, that wasn't what I intended to do. I didn't care about it. It wasn't what motivated me. And so some people, is that a morally good action or not? I personally don't think it is. So I think that the outcome may have been in congruence with the dictates of morality. But if it wasn't motivated in the right way, because it's justified in the right way, in other words, the special motivation of morality, then I just don't see why it's valuable to do it, why it's good to do it. It's lucky that you did it, and I'm glad that you're built that way, but that's that.
So Lance, someone in the chat asked how you come to your goals.
Well, do they mean like my instrumental goals, or do they mean like fundamental or sort of ultimate goals?
They said, ask Lance how he comes to his goals, and how does he determine what his goals are, what route he'll take to achieve them, and how does he mediate between conflicting goals?
Yeah. So if you're talking about like my terminal goals, like just what I care about, there's like I don't decide on that. Those are just facts about my psychology. It might be possible for people to psychologically change their goals, but from my point of view, the only reason I would do that and want to do that is if I wanted to have different goals. Given the set of goals that I have, that's not one of my goals. So there's just going to be some sort of causal explanation for why I have the particular sort of terminal goals that I have. And then everything else are going to be instrumental or secondary sort of goals, where those goals are just sort of set in order to achieve the terminal goals. And I would do the same thing anyone else would do in that case. I would, deliberate and rely on various sorts of reasoning principles and heuristics. Like if I'm trying to, like, I don't think I'm doing anything unusual if I'm like,
yeah, but Lance, hold on a second, because this is somewhat unusual. So suppose, like I'll use myself as an example because I'm an asshole. So I already continue to point out how much of an asshole I am. But, when I was younger, I was much more of an asshole. But I was the type of person that liked to play chess, and I wasn't the best person at chess, but I was pretty good. I wasn't the worst either. And I, used to talk a lot of smack, display a lot of pride. And in fact, a few fights resulted people becoming like extremely pissed off because I would like mock them or whatever over various moves, like you suck, whatever. And so it was a goal of mine to sort of humiliate people at this game, which I was sort of good at. And I got humiliated plenty, but I could take a beating. And I sort of like, okay, now I want to do that to someone. When I was 14 or so, that was the way that I felt. And then I started thinking that I wasn't really proud on reflection of how I came across in those ways. And I started thinking, gee, is that really a goal I ought to have? Should I really be aiming to like make people feel bad because I happen to be sort of good at something that they aren't as good at? And I came to think that that was the wrong goal to have. And I haven't probably succeeded in annihilating that tendency, but I think that it's valuable to work towards it. I became aware of it at least, and it came some effort to mitigate it with varying success, obviously. But the way you're describing that, you wouldn't imagine someone wanting to change the goals that they have. They just have some goals and start pursuing them. It just doesn't fit with like the way ordinary persons. And I wasn't a philosopher at 14. I was just a hoodlum kid that liked to play chess and fight people. So I'm describing folk psychology here. I'm not describing philosophical reflection.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, that people do that.
But you just did. You said you have some goals. You have some goals, and you wouldn't see. You don't have a goal of changing any of your goals, so you wouldn't know why anyone would. So I'm giving you an account of why someone would. It seems totally ordinary.
Someone just could have the goal of changing their goals. So I'm not denying that people could have those goals. What I would deny is that it's the case that, like, let's say I wanted to humiliate people when I was 14, and then I want to do that when I'm 50, and I never stop to think about whether I ought to humiliate people. I don't think I would have any I don't think I ought to not humiliate people anyway.
Why not?
And well, I don't know. There would need to be a reason why I ought not.
Do you enjoy being humiliated?
No, I don't.
Well, then that's the reason.
But I could just enjoy humiliating others and not being humiliated.
It's not consistent.
Well, hold on. Do you think an MMA fighter has to, like, they can enjoy winning fights and not losing fights? That's not inconsistent. Would that be inconsistent? They could want to win, but also not want to. They want to cause other people to lose, and they don't want to lose. Would that be inconsistent?
No, but it would be inconsistent to say that other person ought not to want to win and to fix the fight so that they can't.
Right, but I don't think so. I value what I value. I don't think other people ought not value something that conflicts with my values. I don't think that.
Yeah, I don't think that either.
Right. So the person that just says, I want to humiliate other people, but I don't like being humiliated, that would just be the same as an MMA fighter that says, I want to win fights and I don't want to lose fights.
It's not, though, because the MMA fighter who doesn't want to lose fights, well, I don't know. So let's put it this way. So suppose that you have I don't know what MMA, mixed martial arts, I do know what MMA is. Okay, so suppose that you have an MMA, a UFC, that's really what I know about it. So let's face it. Suppose you have one of these fighter guys and they don't lose. and they love winning, and they hate losing, and they fight and fight and they blah blah. And then they find out on afterwards that every fight was fixed. What's their response? They love it. They don't love it.
Well, it's going to be contingent on their particular psychology. They might be upset about that. They might think that that's fine. It's going to depend on the person.
So the person who truly values winning, I think, would be upset.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
It'd be weird if they weren't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, is that the person values the fight, the fairness of it, and the competition of it. And if they don't want to lose that competition, but the thing that they're entering, willing, and engaging in is we are pitting ourselves against each other, and I want to battle you. So it would be inconsistent for them to have that and to fix the fight against the other person. And not give them the chance to fairly fight, and give them the chance to win. Even though they hate losing, they owe it to the other person to give them a chance to win, or I think they don't truly value winning.
Well, they could even just value humiliating other people. So let's say there's a boxer that just values humiliating other people.
Yeah.
Would it be inconsistent if they didn't want to be humiliated themselves? Like they just enjoy humiliating other people in the ring, and they're like in cahoots with fixing the fights. I mean, I would be willing to bet they're like historically there just are boxers and other sorts of fighters like that. Yeah,
I agree, but I'm not saying that you must have enjoy everything that you are. So if you enjoy humiliating somebody, and somebody else humiliates you, and then you become indignant, I think that's the inconsistency. I don't think you have to enjoy being humiliated. The whole point of the inconsistency is that you don't enjoy being humiliated, but the thing which is the thing that you enjoy and don't enjoy is the same. It's just that the humiliation isn't yours in the other case, but it's still humiliation. So you seem to want to argue that it's my humiliation that I'm disagreeable to, but I think it's humiliation. And then once you start to transcend your personal point of view, your place in history, et cetera, then what you see, the thing that you're really disagreeable is the humiliation part. And that's the same. They're humiliated, you're humiliated. That's the same. So if you don't like it, the thing you don't like is being humiliated. That's happening over there. So you have a reason to not like what's happening over there. It seems to, and I don't see how you'd fuse the predicate in the way that you want to, my humiliation versus their humiliation. It doesn't seem that it's mine makes it different.
Is this, so it seems to me, and maybe I'm just wrong about this, that it would be an empirical claim, whether it's the case that when a person, like if a person said, I enjoy humiliating others, that it's the case that like they are against humiliation and they're for humiliation, like in some abstract sense from the point of view of the universe, or it's just the case that they genuinely just enjoy humiliating others and they also do not enjoy being humiliated.
I would take it as an empirical. Yeah, I think that's an.
Okay, so then I would want to look at the like psychological evidence to show that it's the case that when a person is, say, selfish, or they have different standards for themselves than for others, like they care about, like, so a person might say, I value my family members more than I value other people's family members, and I understand that they value their family members more than they value my family members, but I don't like. From my point of view, like I might care that other people value their family members, but I'm not going to assign the same amount of weight to their family members as I do to my own.
Well, no one's saying that you have to, because there may be other factors that weigh the scales. So I was arguing for a bare minimal. They matter. That you need some other things to weight the scale, which is, I think, is what you just admitted to in a sense. Well, just in that circumstance. Yeah, well, that's all I need is one. I mean, that's really all that matters.
Well, that would just be a psychological fact about that person that they care about that. But I don't think that, like, I'm not rational if I don't have the same psychological states as they do. So, like, if an alien,
but you're using a different sense of rationality, though. So, I mean,
and so like the sense of rationality that you have in mind, I'm fine with just saying that there's these two different senses, and you could say you don't like mine or you don't want to call it rationality. You know, I could call it smashionality. That's fine.
I say
In that
practical
case,
rationality, but it assumes the kind of thing I'm talking about is what I would
but I don't
say.
think that's where I think there's a disagreement. I think that we don't agree on, I think we're disagreeing somewhere here. I don't think we're just talking past.
I mean, you know, I already said at the beginning, you're way more of an expert on this stuff than I am. So
I wouldn't say that I am.
I'm just kind of arguing from my common sense views. I don't think I've done anything except sort of display my misunderstanding of Kant and things of that. I mean, I'm just sort of arguing from the common sense. So you know, my expertise was more in the semantics of moral expressions and things. That's what I cared about. It's more philosophy of language and cognitive science. But this is
maybe we should talk about that.
Well, yeah, we can if you want, but I'm not against talking about normative theories. I'm just saying that's not. I don't have any special expertise there.
Oh, I don't mean normative theories. I meant like the semantics of language. I don't know, because so I'm also like I'm not in a philosophy program. My specialization isn't in metaethics from the perspective of, say, analytic philosophers. It's in metaethics from the perspective of a psychologist looking at the psychology of metaethics. I am interested in like realism and anti-realism in that debate. And that's a big thing that I tend to discuss, but that's not the focus of like my dissertation. My dissertation is on the methodological problems in the empirical research. That's why when you saw that I was asked questions about those, I immediately jump on those and then I just start, I just rattle off a bunch of stuff.
And there I think we agree, although I don't know, because, you know, I tend to think like I was reading this paper I mentioned earlier, a couple others too, but this one you were talking about like the different kinds of relativism, descriptive relativism being one, and how hard it is to make the case actually for descriptive relativism existing. And so I do wonder what is it sounds like that paper was way more ecumenical maybe than your personal views are. But what is your view about descriptive relativism? Do you think you can establish it?
Yeah, I think you can empirically show that people have different moral values. I mean, it depends on exactly what you mean by descriptive relativism, because in there I talk about fundamental differences in people's moral values. Right. And it turns out that that's ridiculously hard to show, because you would have to show, so maybe I have to back off on that. So yeah, that was more ecumenical because it was an encyclopedia entry. So it wasn't my purpose in writing that to like present my perspective on this. Right. So descriptive relativism is just, this claim that people do in fact have different moral beliefs. But then it turns out, I think you're onto something here. If what you're getting at is this is actually super hard to show. Yes. I don't even remember. Do I say that in there? I don't remember. No,
that's my view, which I take this to support.
So I do think it's super hard to show, because what you would have to show is you can't just go out. Here's what you couldn't do to show that people have fundamentally different moral values is you go out and survey one person and say, hey, do you think it's okay to like execute people? And they say no. And then you go and like, I don't know, you surveyed like the Aztecs when the conquistador showed up, and they're like, yeah, of course it's okay to execute people. We need to sacrifice them to the sun god. It might look on the surface like they have fundamentally different moral values, but it could just be that the reason that they've reached different moral conclusions is due to differences in non-moral beliefs. And if you talk to that person and you're like, hey, I'm sorry to break it to you, it turns out there is no sun god and they're not mad that you're not sacrificing people. So like, you don't have to do that. And they would be like, oh shit, okay, well, I guess then let's not carve people's hearts out. So in that case, it could be that on some level, they have the same general moral principles as a person that seems to have the opposite moral beliefs, just due to differences in non-moral beliefs. Empirically, I think showing that they actually do have the same moral beliefs or that they have different moral beliefs is ridiculously difficult. I don't know. Hard,
No, and I think even more like fundamentally is that maybe you disagree, even though you think it's hard. I think that there are some moral statements which are just analytic, like just true by definition. So I think that murder is wrong is one of those, because murder is defined as an unjustified killing, and being wrong is defined as being unjustified. And so to say that murder is wrong is simply to assert that unjustified killing is unjustified, which is a tautology. And the real debate that seems like disagreement, I don't think really people disagree. Who could that an unjustified killing is unjustified? Who would disagree with that? The real disagreement is over which things count as murders. In other words, which things are justified or not, which gets you back into the realm of normative debates. And so you say, meat is murder. No, it's not. Well, what they're really saying is killing animals is unjustified, as an unjustified killing. And the other person saying, no, it's not. So the debate then, it's an inflammatory way of putting it, maybe given certain background assumptions, blah, blah, blah. But So I think there are certain kind of blanket statements like that don't need empirical support. They're sort of, the normative language is built into their definitions. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I just agree with that. That seems fine to me.
Okay, yeah, and so that's, I think, one of the ways that it's really hard to get descriptive relativism. One of the ways another way you might get it is that there will be cases where it seems like there's real clear disagreement, when no, they really just disagree about whether the case should be described in that way or not. And this goes all the way back to Kant. Kant is, when I teach this to undergrads, they get so pissed about this shit, but Kant was like, you should never lie. But sometimes you can tell an untruth. It's not a lie, though. You see, because a lie means unjustified falsehood, don't you know, or something like that. And some falsehoods are justified. So Kant says, suicide's always wrong, but self-sacrifice, noble, wonderful. Self-sacrifice is you dive on the hand grenade to save your friend. That's not suicide, Kant says. You willingly ended your life, but not suicide. That's self-sacrifice. So then the debate comes, and that's exactly the debate you find nowadays between our various cultures that are engaged in certain wars. When you have one side, sending someone in to we call them a suicide bomber. They call them a martyr. What's the difference? Well, suicide is unjustified, we think, or bad or wrong or something like that, or weird. And they think, it's something else. So they would disagree over what the nature of that act is. I'm not saying they're right, by the way. Don't snip this and take me out of context. I'm not saying they're correct. I'm saying this is an example of how that probably, the terrorist and I agree that unjustified killings are wrong. We disagree about which killings are justified. And that's a very serious disagreement that people fight over and go to war over, and obviously, but it's not a disagreement about whether murder is acceptable, I think. And that's one of the real difficulties about trying to even get to what the core issues here are.
Yeah, there's a deeper worry here, because I've been in experimental philosophy for a while and I use all these empirical methods, but over time I've become very skeptical of their efficacy for addressing questions that I consider, you could call them like nominally empirical. And the reason I might call them that is because of the kinds of concerns that I've encountered when I've studied these issues empirically, but they were initially raised. Have you read this paper? It's called The Rise and Fall of Experimental Philosophy.
I have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what I'm kind of doing is thinking, he's kind of got a point. So what he points out in there is he's like, all right, if you actually want to know what a non-philosopher thinks about a philosophical issue, you could run all the studies you like. But if you want to know that they interpreted the question in the way that you intended, and that the reports are actually accurately telling you what their philosophical position is, you would need to ensure that they understood the question. And
turn them into a philosopher.
Right, exactly. So what does that look like in practice? Well, some experimental philosophers with the meta-ethics stuff is they hit people with all these questions. Now, my empirical research shows they don't understand those questions the researchers intend, like this disagreement scenario. That's just one piece. It's like the tip of a very big iceberg of all the ways in which people are not understanding these questions about meta-ethics. Just to give you an example, when I ask people like one study just asked people if it says like, abortion is wrong. Do you think that this is like objectively true? So in that study, they're assuming that people understand objective in the way that philosophers do.
Right.
And it turns out they don't. So some people said it means their judgment was reached in an unbiased way. So notice, that's a completely reasonable interpretation of objective. Objective is used to mean unbiased or without prejudice. And some
it's the way we beat out of the undergraduates in philosophy classes. We say, we mean it this way, not that way. So it's exactly part of the training of becoming a philosopher.
Right. So, they're not understanding these questions. So researchers have constructed what I call training paradigms, where they give them all this stimuli, like they explain meta-ethical distinctions, they give them exercises, they give them all these sentences. Are these truth apt? Are these not truth apt? After telling them what that means. And then they look at the responses that they give. Now, there's a couple issues to that. One is that I'm not convinced they understand the issue even after doing that. And one thing you could do, you could imagine having someone read a paragraph about quantum mechanics and then giving them really simple multiple choice questions. And if they get like 2 out of 3 right, you go, I guess they understand quantum mechanics. No, I don't think that the exercises are adequate. But the other issue with that is, once you've done that, now they're baby philosophers. They're no longer the folk. So you're not asking the folk a question. You're asking some sort of like quasi-junior philosopher. So what I call that in the context of those studies is spontaneous theorizing. So I'm saying that if you want their pre-theoretical intuitions, you can't get that by prompting them to theorize. and then give an answer. And so you're stuck with this sort of paradox. It's not really a paradox, it's kind of this tension where there's no way to be confident that the answer you're getting demonstrates an understanding of what you're asking if you don't give them the instructions and the training. And the moment you do give them the instructions and training, you can no longer be sure that the response that they're giving reflects what they would have given without it. So you're kind of stuck. And so
and you hope it wouldn't, in a sense, because you're teaching them how to use the words better and understand the concepts. But
but then it means you can't really figure out what the folk think. You can only figure out what philosophers think about what the folk think in practice. So Koppen and I don't know. Or
maybe we'd have to rethink what we mean by folk. So I wonder why folk means like the idea of pre-theoretical, is pretty fanciful because, we're already arguing about these things and theorizing in a common sense way anyway. You might think about our own mental lives and other persons and stuff like that. So pre-theoretical, maybe just folk should be like, no college degree or not a degree in that subject or something. But why is there insistence on their being totally untutored?
Yeah, just the idea that they're untutored doesn't make sense. Everybody's carrying on board some background theoretical assumptions. So like some of these surveys, like one of the free will studies, it was conducted in students at, I think, Brigham Young University. So like Mormons, well, if they grow up with Mormonism, that is providing them with some normative and possibly meta-ethical information. So, and in the case of, the reason I brought up Mormonism is because that was a study on free will. And it turns out that Mormonism, as far as I understand it, this idea of like, I forget the term, it's like free agency or something. There's like something kind of like free will that's pretty important for Mormons. And so like they wouldn't be coming at it pre-theoretically. What does that mean? So like if you have a person that like lived in the woods under ideal conditions, you would have something like a non-theoretical view. What would the non-theoretical view be? So I don't know that there's such thing as a pre-theoretical view. There's like a pre-training and academic philosophy point of view. But that's not why would we call that pre-theoretical? I would just call that I don't know what to call that, but I think that's a problem. So, what Koppen points out is the only way to actually ensure that the participants in these, you can't just give them like a multiple choice question. You need to sit down and talk with them and make sure that they understand, like that they're understanding the thought experiment and they're not misinterpreting it. And like, you have to engage in something that looks an awful lot like philosophical dialectic. So,
but you could pretend it's not by calling it qualitative research.
You could call them like Socratic interviews.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, because there was some sense in which X-Phi wanted to be considered like, sort of serious science. So I think there's a push towards, let's do what they do, surveys and objective, stats and things of that nature. But some of the questions, as we've known for a long time, lend themselves better to these more like informal methods where you have discussions and try to get them to think through these scenarios. But I don't know why that should invalidate them as the folk, because they're still like fledgling enough that their kind of intuitive reactions to these things as they become clearer can still be canvassed and assessed. And then we can say like, maybe they don't count as folk under some pristine notion, but why couldn't, because I think of myself when I started first learning philosophy and studying this stuff, and I thought of myself as pretty folk. People were telling me, "Oh, the light doesn't have any color; it's just electromagnetic radiation." I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about, dude? Red light, green light, duh!" Like, that's pretty like folk. So I felt at the time that I could sort of like understand the questions better and know what my kind of intuitive responses were. And then upon reflection and equilibrium, blah, blah, I changed my mind about like a lot of stuff. But I still sort of feel like wasn't there a sense like kind of at the beginning where you could still sort of like, even after you trained them a bit, count them as, novice or apprentice or something like that enough to have their judgments sort of representative of what the untutored person may have thought. Although you can't be sure, but do you need that standard, do you think, or can you just be reasonably?
Yeah, I think that you could make some inferences there, but so if they're slightly tutored, it's more likely that their views are reflective of what people think without intense academic training than if you survey people with intense academic training for pretty uncontroversial reasons. So that's fair enough. But I do have a concern about this, which is that in some cases, it might be that people didn't have any particular view about the philosophical distinction in question. And so what I do in the dissertation is I talk about this. I start with this comparison. So imagine, so I say, imagine there's these two people talking about a barbecue, and one of them says, I'm really worried it's going to rain tomorrow, and the other goes, okay, well, maybe it'll rain tomorrow, maybe it's not, maybe it won't. Let's go ahead and do the barbecue anyway, and they go ahead and do the barbecue. So we could ask this question: so they're talking about like predicting future events and what the future is like, and they're making these sort of causal claims. So we could say, hey, when they were making these claims about what was going to happen tomorrow, like whether it was going to rain, which perspective did they take on how to interpret quantum mechanics, like with respect to causal events? Do they endorse some like hidden
many worlds,
hidden variable, many worlds, Copenhagen? And so what you could do is you could take these people, you could say, let's say it's Alex and Sam, and you're like, hey, Alex and Sam, here's these views in quantum mechanics. You explain them all. You have them watch, like, I don't know, a Stephen Hawking lecture on YouTube or something. Give them some time, as little as time as you want, or as much time as you want, without turning them into a theoretical physicist. Whatever you think will work. And then you ask them, and then they're like Copenhagen or something. Can you then infer that before you ever spoke to them that they were Copenhagians? I don't think that you can. You might be able to say something like, they had a psychological disposition to endorse a Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. You might even be able to say, like, in minimally biased instructions, but the couple worries you might have is that the instructions are biasing them towards that conclusion, and that they just didn't have the conclusion before you ask them. And I think that's the key one there. You can't just assume.
So I wish I'd read your dissertation because it sounds super interesting. So I will check it out. But couldn't you say that? So them forming that assessment in response to them being taught this stuff is, so suppose you find some pattern of results amongst persons who formed these assessments. They didn't have them before, whatever. Then couldn't you generalize that and say, well, the folk N% will do this in these circumstances based. So isn't that still something about the folk then that they, that they would have these? So that maybe was your disposition thing, but I think you can like broaden it out from them to like the populace a bit, right?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, so it would just require like a whole lot of psychological work because there's all these issues of generalization. Because like, you're familiar with like the weird distinction in psychology? Yes. Yeah. So in case,
wait, I always forget what the last one: Western, Western, educated, rich, industrial, democratic. Yeah.
Yeah. So just for people that are listening to this that don't know the distinction, so Joe Henrich and some other people have done all this work to say, hey, the vast majority of research, and they like basically survey the literature in social scientific research, like psychological research, and what they find is almost all studies are conducted on people from weird societies. So these are populations drawn from nations who are, the nation compared to the other nations is more Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. It doesn't mean every single person in these studies is, of course. So what they find with that is, the question then is, given that the research is super skewed in who it's looking at, so it's looking at this narrow bandwidth of people, and then there's all these other kinds of people, you could ask this question of, can you generalize from that population to everybody else? And what they gather is a bunch of evidence suggesting probably not very well. So it looks like that's not a very representative population. But in principle, and this is what Mashry and others are doing, you can conduct cross-cultural research on folk philosophical views and sort of get some sort of converging lines of evidence. Maybe you'll get some variation. And there's this ongoing dispute between Mashry and a few other people at Stitch, maybe. There's a few philosophers arguing, there's lots of cultural diversity in folk philosophical views. And then Nobe and I don't know who's on his side are arguing not really. Right. If you look at it, what it looks to me like is like you do find differences, but the effect size isn't super huge. So I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, you probably can make inferences. You can generalize and say stuff like it's a psychological fact about people that when they're present, like just as an example, I'm not saying this is true. Most people have a disposition when presented with the like determinism and arguments for compatibilism and incompatibilism tend to be compatibilists. And that could be a psychological fact about people. Right. What would be
surprising.
Yeah, that research is a little strange. It looks like people kind of break 50-50, but of course, it's hard to make estimates of effect sizes when the research is really noisy, much less whether there's an effect in any particular direction. It's very hard to know the magnitude of the effect given this research, especially because this research tends to have pretty low sample sizes, and actually getting an estimate of the actual effect size is pretty hard with any level of precision. So Yeah, I don't think experimental philosophy is like not telling us anything, but some of its pretenses may need to be curbed and humbled and brought down to earth a little bit, with the recognition that figuring out what a person's philosophical views are without tainting them in the process is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and also whether we should care about untainted philosophical views.
Yeah, that's another question. I'm not sure how much we should care.
Right. If you haven't thought about the issues and reflected on them, it's like, okay. But I mean, because, you know, at least in the area that I sort of know most about this stuff, which is the sort of Michael Dennett debate about, you know, natural kind terms and names and the folk views about reference and stuff like that. At least there, I think you can make a plausible case that the folk are experts about linguistic usage, which you can't make in this case. About so some of the criticisms, like I think, you know, Dennett responds to it, would say, you know, well, the folk are just we're consulting the experts, right? The intuitions that folks have about whether this is referring to that or not, that's all there is. That's what it is. But I don't really think you can make that argument with respect to free will, compatibilism, ethics, more, you know, the things that we've been talking about. So maybe X-Phi would be more suited to some debates than others if you bought that line of argument. I don't know.
That sounds really plausible to me, that there are going to be some issues that the folk, like, it's like, it might be an empirical question to figure out which ones there are or something. Yeah. And maybe once we do a bit of work, we could start getting some general principles that let us make reasonable guesses about what things the folk will be experts about and what not. I think I'm inclined to be pretty sympathetic to this. So you don't think people are going to be experts about like free will stuff?
No.
Yeah, neither do I.
Yeah,
are you aware of all the research on that?
Some of it.
Okay, so there's three main lines of research on that. One is whether the folk are compatibilists or incompatibilists. One are the behavioral consequences if you prime people to be
the cheating stuff or not. That's the stuff I sort of know about. But I thought it was all non-replicated pretty much at this point.
It wasn't, yeah. So that set of stuff, that has like failed replication in some cases multiple times.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the researchers, most of them have been like, yeah, okay, it doesn't look like these effects are here. I don't know if you looked at those studies though, because my issue, there's so much focus in psychology on replication. And I noticed in the chat, someone said, assuming you could even call psychology a science. And you know, it's a good point. Yeah, it's like an uppercut to psychology, but you know, psychology.
Well, some people would say actually that's why you could call it a science, because this is what science does. It's self-correct given the methods, enough time, blah, blah, blah. That's what science is. But okay, go ahead. Sure,
we could call it a baby science that's growing. Yes. But you know what? It hasn't been around a long time. Right. So my issue with those studies isn't simply that they don't replicate. And as far as I know, they don't. I don't know if there's specific behavioral ones that do. Anyway, setting aside the issue of whether the study replicates, like whether given the hypothesis and given the instruments, if you get a statistically significant result and then you rerun the study under the same conditions, if you get the same result, or like, you know, still significant, whatever. Setting aside that issue, there's a serious issue with the types of priming that they used. So they use these two different procedures. And one of them, it's complicated. So I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about it. But one of the main ones they use is this passage from Francis Crick. Right. And this is, you're supposed to read that passage, and that's supposed to reduce your belief in free will. Now, if you look at that passage, what it doesn't do is it does not say, I'm going to give you an argument why you shouldn't believe in free will, and then just gives an argument. What it says is, I can't remember exactly what the details are, but it gives this like hyper reductionist, eliminativist, really hardcore, like, you know, you're just a bag of chemicals, nothing really matters, you're going to die, and no one is going to ever remember you, and nothing in life. It's like this like hype. It's like taking scientism, distilling it into the most nihilistic and horrible outcome possible, and then putting that in 2 paragraphs. And then you give that to people. And then keep in mind, most of your participants are going to be like theists and Christians and you know, that sort of thing. I think this is one of the original studies where like they were all at a Mormon university, or sorry, they're in a university in the Mormon area. So like most of them are Mormons. And then you're giving them that, and then you're looking at their behavior. Well, if they have a behavioral change, is it because you slightly reduce their confidence in free will, or because you threaten their entire like meaning and existence? I don't know. So the problem is that the priming just, you know, it's like if I said,
it overshoots it.
Right. So imagine I want to say, let's see what happens if I try to persuade you of anti-realism. And then what I say is, you know, moral anti-realism is true, and here's an argument for why it's true, whatever. And then I say, also, life has no meaning. Nobody loves you. Your parents don't love you. Like, we're all just bags of chemicals. Yeah. You're going to die, and you'll be forgotten, and the universe will, you know, peter out in this heat death where everyone will be dead, and everything you've ever cared about is gone. And then I ask you questions. Well, now I have no idea if it's because I showed you the anti-realism argument or because of all that other stuff I threw in there. So, like this,
yeah, because it could be like the way you deal with core belief threat or like something, right?
Right. So the studies are just deeply and obviously confounded in a way that's so obvious. I don't know how the study got past review. Like, I don't mean to be that critical of it, but like, they needed to rerun the study without doing that. And they do have this other procedure, but it has problems of its own. That's the Velton procedure and whatever. But I wanted to ask you about this third group of studies, which are free will scales. Have you seen any of these?
No, I don't know about, huh?
Okay, so you know, like standard like personality skills where it's just like a sentence and then you express how much you agree or disagree. Like,
Yeah.
I like going to the movies. I like looking at new art. I like trying new foods. And if you agree with those, you're high in openness to experience. If you disagree, you're low in openness to experience, right? Right.
Like
so,
depression inventories and things of that nature.
Right. So they're just like that, but for belief in free will. Now, if you look at those scales, they're like, one of them is that there's two main scales, the free will inventory and the free will and determinism plus scale. Now, I want to give you one of the items on that scale and ask you whether you think this is, whether agreement or disagreement with this is a good indication of whether people believe in free will. Here's what the item says. Strength of mind can always overcome the body's desires.
That's completely compatible with determinism, 100%.
So you
yeah,
can
no,
agree with
because that seems to assume fatalism or something as opposed to determinism.
Yeah, so there's something strange about that. It's also like framed in this like strange folk psychological view where like your body has desires. There's something funny about that. I wouldn't put that in a question, but like it just seems like any answer is compatible with believing in free will,
right,
or not believing in free will,
right.
And you get other ones like this. I don't know if this is exactly one, but it's very similar because they use these qualifiers. People always have free will. Agree, disagree.
Okay. Yeah, even when they're sleeping or on drugs or
right. So let's say you disagree with that. That's interpreted as you don't believe in free will.
Yeah, that's weird.
So it's what's strange about it is
is that because I thought you said this was they were going to give some like scale at the end. So wouldn't it be like, you know, maybe there's people that are absolute inviolable free willists and, you know, occasionalists or something like that, or, you know, because there is in the literature, those people think there's those life forming moments when you can make those decisions, but mostly we're automatons, but in those key moments, you know, you tilt the scale.
Sure. No, that's fair, but there's a distinction between whether you like super duper believe in something and whether you believe that it has like it's always in application. So like,
right, exactly.
They're just confounding those two things. Those aren't the same thing. I can be like, I'm absolutely certain there's super duper there's free will, just not when you're sleeping. And then someone else might interpret it as like, well, clearly they don't mean when you're sleeping. So I agree with that. But then the other person disagrees, but they're agreeing and disagreeing for reasons.
Or the person could be like, oh, you do have it when you're sleeping because if someone came, you could do something, or like.
Right. So there's all sorts of ways you could think about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's just such a variety of ways people could interpret it. And that always is a problem there. It's just, I don't know, because now it's hinging whether you believe in free will and whether you always believe in free will. It would be like saying whether if you think, so I could ask the question, do you think it's always wrong to kill another person? And if a person says no, you interpret that as they're not against killing people.
Right, they're not against murder.
Right, that would be a weird interpretation. Right. So like, you know, that it's just, what it's doing is it's hinging. The question is asking whether you think people always have free will or they don't always have free will.
Right.
But if you think people don't always have free will, it doesn't mean you think people don't have free will. So it's not appropriate to interpret it as that. And here's the thing, every question on both scales includes a qualifier like that. All of them, every single question, always, every time. So like, do you have a question? Like one of these items is something like, people are always responsible for their actions.
Yeah, that's a very strange way to put it. Yeah.
And if you agree with that, you believe in free will. If you disagree with that, you don't believe in free will.
People can be responsible for their actions seems a much more neutral way to put it. Or
right. So, you know, when you look at these, I like none of the items look like.
But even that's gonna, because, you know, the whole thing is like everyone in that, it seems to me as an outsider that everyone in that debate assumes that free will means libertarian free will, whereas every philosopher assumes free will means, you know, could be compatibilism. But I don't think that the average person, like you try to convince them that, you know, compatibilism is a form of free will, and they're like,
I suspect they would if you cause that's kind of my reaction to it, you know, despite, you know, going to Tufts and being around Dennett all the time, I still didn't buy it. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think people would agree with that. You know, it's an open question, but, you know, it doesn't matter which way they would go, unless it just happened to turn out 100% of your people, or at least most of them, interpreted it in the same way as one another. What if like 30% of people interpret it as compatibilism? Now you're asking people a question and they're interpreting it in different ways along that axis too, not just the like always and all these other. So what these researchers are doing is they're giving these very impoverished questions. There's like statements that are like 5 words, and they're expecting everyone to interpret that question the same way without any evidence that they would do so. Here's another funny thing about those papers. As far as I know, and I looked, maybe I didn't spot it. I don't think either of those papers ever sort of operationalizes free will. In other words, they don't say, here's the type of free will we're looking at. They just ask questions about free will and assume everybody's going to understand free will to mean the same thing. But the thing is, there's other researchers that then went out and asked people what they think free will is, and people gave different answers from one another, not surprisingly. Because they don't have training in philosophy to converge on a consistent answer. But free will is an especially poor choice because the whole issue in philosophy about free will seems to be what free will is. Right. So I've got this paper where I'm like, I say, look, free will as is like a philosophical term of art that's like a placeholder term for a debate about what the placeholder is referring to. So you can't just run a study where you assume it refers to the same thing when the whole debate is what is it talking, what is it about, what is it referring to? That's very weird.
Exactly. No, I agree. The assumption is that the folk know what they're talking about, but yeah, it's not clear. I mean,
so Lance,
I agree completely.
Lance, do you have particular intuitions about free will, given, like, I think earlier in the conversation you were saying that you didn't value your own autonomy or something to that effect?
When I say
remember correctly.
So like if I say I don't value my autonomy, I value it in certain respects and not in others, and I would have to cash out exactly what that means. So it's just it just gets complicated saying what that means. Like, I do care about my autonomy. I would say I value my autonomy. I just have to be very clear on what I mean by that. I don't think free will, like, it depends what you mean by free will. Like, I don't think there is libertarian free will. So, we don't have that. I don't think we have that. And I still think things matter and I care about stuff. And, I don't even think that's relevant to the moral realism issue. I don't think the fact that there's no free will, like, undermines moral realism. So I don't think there's any implications of that for anything that I think. I agree. Like the fact that there's no libertarian free will. So then there's this question of compatibilism. And then to me, that's all just some sort of a terminological thing. It's like some terminological sleight of hand where we're just sort of nominating some sort of socially constructed conception of holding one another mutually accountable as our notion of free will, or some other thing you want to just call it's just verbally anointing something as free will. And I don't, like, I can think that thing is real or not, whether or not I want to call it free will. So that also doesn't seem to matter to me. So neither of one of them seem relevant.
I thought I should bring this up because so many people were saying it in my Discord, which is a lot of people were saying that the earlier disagreement had to do with Lance just not understanding Kant, and that if he understood Kant more, some guy says it doesn't seem like Lance grasps the contours of the Kantian argument, let alone the details.
The contours, get it? Get it, Lance? Contours.
It's certainly possible. It feels like that we would have it would be very frustrating for us to have a conversation about it where you try to get me to understand it, because the description you're giving is the sort of thing where it's removing all the background context that I would have if I sat down and I read a bunch of Kant. And so if I did sit down and read a bunch of Kant or a bunch of secondary literature explaining what Kant means, because I don't want to read Kant because it's poorly written.
I know it's my fault. I'm not, it's not your fault for not understanding Kant. It's my fault for, I'll just give you my version of it. I don't think Kant would endorse what I said necessarily, but.
Right, but even if, would never mind whether Kant endorses it, I still would want to understand your perspective. And I just feel like that would be a long conversation. And I feel bad about how this started, because I feel like you're explaining something, I'm not getting it. I'm saying I don't agree, but there's a tension between me not agreeing and me not understanding. It might be that if I understood, I would agree, but I don't know if I do understand. So
I was being uncombative, and I guess I hadn't eaten lunch or something. Maybe I was just
Richard was back to
unnecessarily rude.
He was back to his chess playing days.
That get the better of me sometimes, I have to admit. I don't think I was any kind of trying to humiliate him or anything like that. I just think I did feel that maybe he wasn't being completely genuine in some of the psychological attitudes he was espousing, but maybe that's my misinterpretation.
Yeah, I don't think I'm being disingenuous. If that's
don't worry, Lance. Yeah, I think in each one of our talks, Richard has accused me of being disingenuous about my psychological beliefs.
Yeah,
but-
I didn't accuse anyone of being disingenuous. So what I said was, it
No,
seemed
fair.
to me that you were saying things about your own psychological nature, which seemed to me to be not things you really believed, but were things you could adopt to that could be plausible to win an argument, but they don't strike me as like plausible for the way that humans psychology works.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. We might just disagree about human psychology.
Yeah, but that's why I was trying to say, even if we did, like, so I think we should build a psychology like that. And that it would be better if there were beings like that, and that we ought to aspire to be such beings. And even if not one human who ever lived up to the ideals of the Enlightenment, a creature who did would be a contribution to reality, the likes of which be pretty cool, I would say. So it seems like what you're sort of committed to is that you don't see any reason for like thinking that's a good project, or like that we ought to like, engage in a project of transforming ourselves into such a creature. So I am curious, like, what do you think about whatever our psychology is? It seems the product of evolution, and that's.
Are you
like
talking about
happenstance.
a transhumanism style project? Like,
Oh yeah, 100%.
yeah, okay. All right, I just wanted to be clear for the audience in case they didn't know that you love transhumanism.
Yeah, I'm a transhumanist. So I think that in the humanist tradition is in betterment of human condition by use of reason and science. And the transhuman is just an extension of that, by applying it to ourselves to become the kinds of, to achieve the kind of idealized creature that we have often appealed to in our moral theorizing, impartial observers, ideal spectators, rational deliberators, dispassionate, all these things that we, in the history of the universe, people have sort of thought were important. Maybe we aren't those things, but seems to me valuable to have something like that. So I wonder, like, what your views about transhumanism
that actually sounds great
are.
to me. Yeah, so I'm very much on board with transhumanism. I was on board with transhumanism before I was like even studied any of this stuff. So,
but transhumanism, sure. Like, so because like a person who said, I love transhumanism, but I would like to disable the empathy module in my brain so that I could more enjoy strangling people to death, I would say, no, bad transhumanism. Transhumanist who says, I would like to enhance my rationality so that I could further appreciate which things are contradictory, etc. Good transhumanism. So I'm not just pro transhumanism, I'm pro a project of extending the kind of creature we are now towards a more perfectly rational type of agent, which seems good.
Yeah, so insofar as I'm in favor of transhumanism, I'm in favor of like the use of technology to radically alter humans or even replace humans with some sort of synthetic beings that are way better than us. I don't know, call it posthumanism, whatever, if you want.
Right.
But it's just the project I would have in mind would probably differ from yours. I would favor doing something that would do its best to like increase the total amount of well-being and minimize the total amount of suffering in the world. There might be some caveats and qualifications and wrinkles I would add to that. But that would generally be the project.
And what if you could be convinced that like valuing rationality in the sense that we were talking about earlier was the means to achieve that?
It depends, because if it's presupposing realism, then I wouldn't be able to make sense of like what it would mean for me to value realism, given my current standards. I don't think realism is true.
But why does it have to presuppose realism?
Oh, if it doesn't, then I'm fine with that. So I'm going to maintain, unless
there's something that's better about being the kind of creature who values logical consistency.
Right. So I only think things can be better or worse relative to the perspective of like an agent or an evaluative standard.
The reason is the evaluative standard.
Well, so like I would think I could be convinced that it's better for everybody to be rational, but I don't think I could be convinced, at least not easily, without direct arguments for realism, that it is better for people to be rational, independent of whether I care about that.
But why? I mean, I guess I'm getting lost on the chain here. What? I don't understand.
So it depends what you mean by rationality. If your notion of rationality entails that certain things, it's like rational to do things independent of whether it would be conducive to the goals of the agent, then I'm not going to care about that. And so if that's
how about if it was just be maximally, so imagine, suppose that a magical Keebler elf showed up tomorrow and just granted you perfect rationality so that you could instantly see whether there are any contradictions in any of your beliefs at all. You could just like see it, clear as day. They'd be highlighted or something, like pop, oh, that and that, they contradict each other. This is the assertion of the denial of that. And I'm accepting both of them. So the agent just came down and revealed to you this, you had this power to do that. It seems to me that if that happened, then there would be a lot more moral actions.
I would think that
so you disagree. I think that's an empirical claim, though. But I think that it's better to have that sort of world, even if it impaired my choices. I don't know.
I don't think that would necessarily be the case. I think that would be an empirical question. So you could imagine a really weird scenario where people irrationally hold inconsistent beliefs, where they both like value other people and they don't value other people.
Right.
And then you give them, the fairy or the whatever shows up and makes everybody aware of all the logical inconsistencies. Could turn out in reflective equilibrium, people break in the direction of not caring about other people, I think. And then, so they had this tension.
So then they would have to break in the direction of not caring about themselves.
So, but that's where we would disagree. So there would be some sort of substantive disagreement about what it would mean for a person to have consistent or inconsistent beliefs. I think that's at the crux of this. So I think it would be possible for like the fairy to show up, make everybody maximally rational, and now that's just optimizing people's ability to efficiently achieve goals that I think are really horrible, like killing everybody else or torturing people or whatever. So I think what a person cares about is orthogonal to like logical consistency. I just don't think that they're related to one another.
Yeah, I know, I agree. But logical consistency dictates what's logical. And if some things are not logical, then that seems bad. So that's already a normative claim. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I just don't see why you think it's like addressing the normative.
Yeah, I don't think logical consistency is bad. I just think it's logically inconsistent. Like if logical inconsistency it just is a situation in which something's logically inconsistent. I don't think that's necessarily bad. Like if someone told me I could live in the world and I get to choose two sets of beliefs, all logically consistent beliefs, but I'm constantly miserable, or logically inconsistent beliefs, but I'm happy all the time, and there's no other changes, I'm going to pick the second one.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I value happiness, not logical consistency.
But whichever one, but we're talking about what you ought to value, not what you do value. So that's why you keep saying that, like, I do this, I do that, but it's like, this is a question about what you ought to do. And what's rational to do and what's consistent. So I don't see that you saying I would do that, I mean, you can do lots of stuff, but what's the reason?
I don't think there's a fact of the matter about what I ought to value. I don't think it's a meaningful question. Someone would have to tell me why there is some fact of the matter and present an argument for it. I'm not just going to assume that it's true until I could demonstrate otherwise. Someone would have to demonstrate that it is true. And I don't think no one's
wait, what's going on here? So
I don't think it's the case. So like, let's say I value something, like I value happiness or whatever. I don't know what it would mean to ask, well, should I value happiness or should I instead value something else? I don't know what the question is.
Why not? Of course, what we do that all the time.
Well, people can do that.
And in fact, that's the whole point of like ethics and the history of ethics is like, should we value pleasure? Should we value happiness? What does it mean to value happiness? Well, so I mean, that's the whole process of rational reflection on ethics and morals. So maybe you don't think that's valuable in and of itself. But to say that we don't do it, I don't know.
I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm saying I don't do it. Other people can do things. Like someone can wonder how many square circles are in their pocket. Like you can think things that don't make any sense. And so I think that the question is
what's the argument for thinking the question is like that?
Well, so again, someone would need to explain to me how that could make sense. I don't understand it, and this could be because
Why is the incumbency
I'm
on the other person to make you understand something that everyone else finds
no one has an
perfectly
incumbency here.
understandable?
I'm just telling you I don't understand it. So
Yeah.
I can't endorse something I don't understand.
This is the part where it seems a bit disingenuous that you don't understand.
So I'm not being disingenuous. It's like if someone said, hey, how many colorless dreams that are sleeping furiously in your room? And you say, what do they mean? And they go, no, I don't have to explain to you what I mean in a way you understand. Why do you think that that's not true? I don't think colorless dreams are sleeping furiously in my room. If someone wants to say, okay, but they do, you just don't understand what that means. Okay, tell me what it means. And I'd ask this question of moral realists.
The question is, but I already did that. We're just asking the question.
Yeah, but I didn't.
What reasons do you have to value the things that or what reasons can you give for that you ought to value one thing as opposed to the other thing? So
I don't think I need.
If I value,
I just think it's a fact. Like I don't think the question makes sense. Like it just
why?
So like
you haven't given any reason for that since the question clearly makes sense.
I don't think it doesn't clearly make sense to me. So like you think it makes sense, and maybe
and I can give you and we've been arguing for it for an hour that what the reasons are for, and I've given you examples of ordinary cases where
unfortunately I don't understand
that. So you never reflect on your own behavior, your own attitudes, and wonder if you ought to have done that or maybe should have done something different. And
sure, I do,
conclusions from that. So that's what we're talking about.
But I do that, but it's always subordinate to or reflects back on what I value. So when I reflect on my values, it's kind of in this more sort of Humean way, which is was I mistaken about whether my actions were conducive with what I value? Like that I could do that. But I don't think I have the ability.
It's really myopic to take your values to be so engrossing.
Well, I don't know what you mean by myopic. It's I just value what I value.
Viewed.
No, I understand that. But like, if there's something else that could matter to me other than what matters to me, I can't even conceive of what that would mean or what that could be. I just care about what I care about.
It doesn't have to matter to you. You have to understand that it matters to someone else. And that mattering is on par with your mattering. That's the thing we're talking about. So,
but if that doesn't matter to me, then it doesn't matter. Like the only way I'm going to care about anything a realist says is if I care about it. And if it turned out it's an objective moral fact that I shouldn't
but you ought to care about it.
Yeah, but I don't. What does that mean?
It means you're morally failing for not caring about it.
But I don't care if I'm morally failing. So
good. Then you don't care about morality. I mean, some people don't.
Right, but then you're just saying that there's these facts, people ought to follow them, and well, so what if they don't? What are the consequences?
Exactly.
It doesn't seem like
just there are colors. Some people see them, some people don't.
I don't think
I'm going to argue with the colorblind person and try to convince them that there really is this difference in the thing we're talking about is like
you're making it
clearly
seem
visible
like
to everybody else.
You're making it seem like there are like that this is analogous to colorblindness. I don't think that it is.
Of course, a colorblind person wouldn't think that since they're missing some crucial data.
But in the case of colorblindness, someone could actually show, they could describe all the physical processes that are involved. So like you could show that I have the genes of a person that is themselves colorblind. You could describe the physical mechanisms in my eye that I'm missing certain sorts of cones that would allow me to take visible light and transduce it in a way that.
And we can do the same here though.
I don't think you can. And
we'd have to do some like rationality test.
Well, you would have to do some empirical work to show that I'm physically deficient in some way, unless you think that somehow moral realists are able to like access or realize moral facts through some process that isn't, and that if I'm not able to do it, it's not physically mediated by features of my brain that differ from your brain.
No,
I mean, that just sounds like dualism.
No, I'm not a dualist.
Sure. Okay. So like, if you're going to suggest that I'm colorblind because I'm not able to perceive these facts, like like that seems like an empirical question to me.
No, 100%.
So like if realists want to say I'm like failing to perceive or think about moral facts due to some cognitive deficiency, why should I think that I have
100% put that to the test? 100%.
Sure, so would I. And what I think.
And a better prediction is that if we ever did build a fully rational AI agent, then they wouldn't be a paperclip psychopath. They would be a morally perfect being.
So I think that they could be a paperclipper. As we could just program to be a paperclipper.
But then they wouldn't.
So, well, I mean, there might be some sort of circularity there, but I think we could create them So like if realists want to make this empirical claim, that's fine. The project I'm working on is to show that it's actually the realists that there's something psychologically off about what they're doing. So what I think is
that could be too.
is,
yeah, absolutely.
So I think moral realists are subject to something. Possibly, this could be one of the things going on. Is something kind of like apophenia, like they're detecting or thinking that there's patterns, or they're projecting or externalizing their values and preferences onto the world. They're reifying them and thinking they're out there in the world, and they're making some sort of, in some cases, quasi-perceptual mistakes. So it's like a person.
Some people may, but I don't see how the account that I've been giving does that, since it's based on rationality, which is common between humans.
Well, there might just be some conceptual issues with that. So I don't know if that particular issue would be resolved in the way that I would have I would be concerned that there's something psychologically sort of, there's some sort of.
I would be concerned. I agree with what you're saying though. Like if you could show that, like I was a moral realist because of I believed implicitly in just world theory or some shit like that, then I'd be like, oh, ew, no. So if there were like some psychological root, then I would say that's not a good reason. But I don't think that means that there are no good reasons, since I think we've been outlining one, which is sort of this appeal to reason and rationality and consistency, which to me, I mean, the only way that I've ever seen anyone really consistently wiggle out of this is to kind of just go the full on. I mean, I guess what Richard Hare is the guy who says this. He says, there could be like the Nazi who is perfectly okay with them being rounded up and exterminated, and they think that's I deserve it.
So
I don't think pretty bizarre.
So we just disagree on sort of fundamental issues about what rationality would require of us. And I don't think we're going to resolve that in this discussion.
Yeah, but it'd be interesting to see how it could be tested. And, I think that you're right. It's a debate about what rationality is, because I agree that there's this whole camp, like in Bostrom, and there's a whole group of people in that area that think that reason is just practical reason, is just deliberation about means and ends. And then there's this other more normatively laden notion of reason that goes back at least to Kant. And then there's a debate about what is really reason. Maybe that's semantic, like you were suggesting earlier on, maybe it is. But even so, I think that, I would like to live in one world and not the other one.
I mean, Richard, couldn't it be possible that reason follows from value, meaning that value is actually the base layer and reason extends from that and not the other way around?
Well, how would that be possible?
Well, I'm just saying, so like if there's many different kinds of possible reason, like meaning like reasoning, like many alternates to that, and then I ask you, well, why did you pick yours among the alternates? Are you going to give me a reason based on the reasoning you've already picked, or on some meta criteria? And then you can just do the question over and over again.
So you're talking about
it's like the problem of the
logics and stuff?
No, it's basically like the problem of the criterion. You can just keep like, so when you say, this is my criteria for reason and what constitutes it, and then I say, well, what about all the alternates? Why didn't you pick those?
What are the alternates?
I mean, just take whatever. I mean, like
contradiction freeness is, that we're able to reason our way from.
Yeah, an alternate could be something
that logically follows from what.
An alternate could be something that's just gradually deviant from your system, meaning so that you could take somebody like Graham Priest, where maybe he doesn't just flat out accept contradictions, but he does embrace some of them, right? So then you could just.
Well, does he give an argument for that?
Yeah, but
yes. And is the argument contradiction free, or does the argument that he gives contain contradictions? Well, the argument's contradiction free. Actually, the argument for contradictions existing is contradiction free.
Yeah, but okay, then let's say
at the meta level, the principle holds. And I don't really think that you can pick between logics. I think that we come equipped with a reasoning system, and you can't revise it or choose like to adopt a certain kind of logic in the same way that you can choose to adopt a certain theory of physics and reason with it. So I can say, here's the formalism for quantum mechanics, Hilbert space, and here's the formalism for Newtonian physics, Cartesian coordinates, and blah blah blah. So it's just different mathematical systems. I pick one up and start following the rules. I pick the other one up, start following the rules. But reason isn't like that, I don't think.
Yes, so you can't imagine any alteration to it, like meaning like
Well,
not even.
how would there be?
There's
Like,
no
what are
so
you talking about?
there's no disagreeing about what reason is. That's just universally agreed upon.
Well, of course, people disagree about it. What are you talking about?
Okay, so once again, back to the problem of the criterion, where I ask you, why did you select this one and not the alternates that are competing with your conception?
I don't think
And
you can
then,
select anyone because, as I just said, I think that we have this kind of background ability to reason, which we can't select. It's
okay,
there,
is
and
there
then we
someone
use it.
is there someone who disagrees with your inability to select between them?
I don't know. I guess Quine is what are they called? Anti-exceptionalists, generally speaking, in the philosophy of logic, are persons who think that logic is just like any other science in terms of its axioms and its susceptibility to falsification from empirical stuff. So Quine famously thought that logic was sort of at the center of our web of beliefs, but we could revise it if we had the right kind of experience. So that's what I'm disagreeing with. I don't think that that's possible, actually, in the way that that's. So I don't think you get to pick a logic or.
Yeah, but I was just saying, like, are there respectable people who make the counterclaim that you could pick?
Oh yeah, I think like I just said, Quine is a famous one. Hillary
once again,
Putnam
but then
is
it's the
another
problem
one,
of the criterion
and
once
then,
again, which is why do you pick that it's impossible to be able to pick versus being able to pick? What did you use to evaluate those two things?
the background reasoning ability that we have and argumentation.
Okay, I mean, but I'm just so. But you don't think that your valuing reason comes from the fact that you see utility in the world that seems to follow from it. So what you say is reason. Like, let's say, like Lance said earlier, every time we engage in reason, it feels like somebody puts like an ice pick into your penis or something. Like, so that happens every time you engage.
Lance said that? I
No,
must have
no.
been asleep for
Yeah,
that
I remember saying that. No,
you did.
No.
I knew
Yeah.
it. I knew it.
Well, yeah, I was embellishing on what he was saying.
Okay.
So yeah, he was saying, like, let's say
you
you
still
just
have a duty to reason, I guess I would say. And
yeah,
so,
like, okay, so yeah, you feel that feeling of your penis being sawed off, like, as you're reasoning.
now it's sawed off. Holy
Yeah,
mackerel. Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So like, I'm just saying,
Interesting.
so like, and let's say too, like when we did this thing called reasoning, things just kept going wrong. Like, like when people didn't reason, they would invent technologies, like just spontaneously have intuitions about technologies would come to them, and then there would be some sort of invention. But when they went through the process of reasoning, we didn't have cool technologies. Like, that didn't happen. Like, those kind of creative ideas didn't pop into people's heads. So I just think that it seems to me that we would start calling that spontaneous intuition, we would start calling that reason. And what we call reason now would no longer be reason. We would just think that that sucked, and we would want to avoid it for all sorts of just biological reasons. So, I mean, it just seemed like you could imagine, I don't know, some hypothetical world where, ideas pop into people's heads, and when they use reasoning, it actually just interrupts that. And then all the utility that you're gaining is from these spontaneous intuitions. And then it seems to me that actually what we're calling reason, like, or that label, would actually just be placed on that spontaneous intuition process, because we would say, look at all the goods that we get.
I mean, I don't even understand what you're saying. That could be actually be really instantiated. So, suppose that what you said is true, and I think, poof, I'm going to invent. I have this problem, so I'm going to invent this solution, and it just pops in my head spontaneously. But I don't have the ability to reason from that, this success should be duplicated in the future. So, okay, what am I going to do? I'm not going to do anything if I'm not able to connect the results with the consequences, or to recognize that this specific circumstance is an instance of the general kind of case that I want to bring about. then you're not going to do it. You're not going to do anything. So I don't really see the sort of thing you're talking about. I mean, it may luckily turn out the case that always has utility, but it doesn't seem really possible that you can do what you're saying without reasoning in the sense of understanding abstract propositions, understanding when a general rule applies to a specific instance. What follows from that, the fact that all F's are G and this is an F, it should be a G, things of that nature, universal instantiation, law of identity, that this is the same as itself. I just don't see how you make sense of anything without that stuff.
Yeah, I see. So now, I mean, I could keep elaborating on this weird thought experiment, but I just, I think it's interesting. Like, so you think that if reasoning just coincidentally just kept bringing misery into the world, that we would still be obliged to do it?
Yeah, modus ponens is a valid argument form, whether you're happy about it or not.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just trying to say, like, in order.
So saying it's valid says you ought to accept the conclusion if you accept the premises. So
that's not how I interpret it.
Then how do you interpret it?
I just think if something's valid, it means that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true.
Oh, well, then that's just wrong.
Okay. That's how I've always understood validity. I've never understood validity to be necessarily normative, like you should accept the conclusion.
Oh yeah, it is. So I don't, what you're talking about may be some other thing, but if we're trying to give a theory of reason, that's what we're talking about. What follows from what you ought to accept. That it would be irrational for you to affirm the premises and deny the conclusion is that it's wrong of you to do that you've made a mistake, that there's a defect somewhere in your reasoning process, is what it means to call that argument valid in psychological terms. In formalistic terms, you're right. We can write down a bunch of T's and F's, and you can say there are no scenarios where these are T and that is F. But that is not what reasoning is. That's not what human beings do when they reason about things. That's a.
I think that's what I do.
Yeah.
Maybe
bummer.
I think maybe that is what other people do. So,
yeah.
If people aren't, I do what I do. I don't know if other people do what I do. But I don't presume that I ought to accept the conclusion of a valid argument with true premises just because. I accept it because.
What do you mean just because? It's not just because, it's because it's valid.
But it doesn't mean that I ought to accept the conclusion from my point of view.
Well, what do you mean? So you've just accidentally always accepted the conclusion? You've never found a case where
it's that I want generally speaking to conform my beliefs to logical validity.
Okay, so
but I don't think that I have to. Like, if someone could just not care about whether arguments are valid or not, and then they could just not accept the conclusions. And I don't think that, like,
and they would be doing something wrong, but they could do whatever they want. You're right.
Sure, they would be wrong relative to like some evaluative standard whereby one.
No relative at all. They just would be making a mistake.
So, like, I don't think the notion of normative mistakes in a non-relative sense is even intelligible. I don't know what that
means. But it is, though. So
okay, well, maybe it is, but I haven't heard an explanation of it that seems intelligible to me.
Well, here's the explanation. The argument form is valid, which means if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. So if you accept that the premises are true, you ought to accept that the conclusion is true, because if the premises are true, that means the conclusion will be true. So to deny the truth of the conclusion after knowing the truth of the premises would be to make a mistake.
Well, that's
why you ought to accept the conclusion.
Well, if you accept the premises of a true an argument with a valid argument with true premises, and then you don't accept the conclusion, I would think that you are making a mistake, but a mistake of a non-normative kind. You would just have a false belief about what's true. But I don't think it's the case.
Why would you have a false belief about what's true?
Well, because the conclusion is true. And if you don't believe it's true, then you have a false belief.
But suppose you have an invalid argument and the premises are true and the conclusion is true. You're not making any mistake by accepting the conclusion? That's just patently absurd, dude. Come on.
It's just going to be conditional on what your goals and values are.
No, it's not. So if I say, all champagne are sodas, all poodles, no, that's not true. All flowers are plants. All trees are plants. So I have to think of some true conclusion. It's not that all trees are flowers, but all pollinating things are plants, all flowers are plants, all pollinating things are flowers. I can think, I'm not doing a good job of thinking of three things in an invalid form, but you can do it. And someone who accepted that conclusion would be making, on the basis of those premises, would be making a mistake.
Well, so there's going to be one question about whether a person who adopts a particular procedure has a true or false belief as a result of using the procedure. And then there's this, and you could say if they adopt, I would say if they end up with a false belief, they're making a mistake. If they end up with a true belief, they're not making a mistake about what's true, but they could be making a mistake relative to adopting the principles of logic if they're using them incorrectly. But that's a separate sense of being.
Well, no one said they're making a mistake about what's true. They're making a mistake about what is evidence and what supports the truth. So if they think that those things are the reason that you ought to accept this thing, they're wrong. If they rely on those pieces of evidence to accept the conclusion,
they don't have to be making a mistake about what is evidence of what's true. They could just, no, they don't. They could just believe, well, they could just deny. Well, I'm not exactly sure what the claim is, but a person could just say,
the claim is that there's an invalid argument with true premises and a true conclusion, and the person looks at it and infers on the basis of those premises that the conclusion is true. There's a mistake there.
Well, what do you mean by mistake? What is the mistake? What does it mean?
The mistake is that they think there's a logical connection between the premises being true and the conclusion being true, and there isn't.
That could be a mistake. I agree with that, but I don't see a normative mistake here. They would just be incorrect about the relationship between the premises.
The claim that there's a logical relationship is a normative claim.
I don't think that it is. That's the very thing I'm denying.
What else would it be? We can write down formalisms, but no formalism captures what people do. We don't reason in that way. We reason intuitively. I'm
not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is I don't think it's the case that because the premises of there's a valid argument with true premises, therefore you ought to accept the conclusion. That's the only thing I'm denying is this notion of ought and this notion that I'm making some kind of.
But that doesn't. What you're saying doesn't make any sense. You can say those words, but they don't make sense.
I think what you're saying doesn't make sense.
Are meaningless.
I think what you're saying is literally meaningless. So right back
a person who says, I know that those premises are true, but I ought not to accept the conclusion is just not rationally interpretable.
Well, so if someone said, look, if you accept this valid argument, if you believe the premises and then you accept the conclusion as a result, I'm going to torture everyone forever. I'm going to do my best. I don't think I have the sort of voluntary control to not believe a conclusion that follows in that way. But I sure wish I
didn't say you should believe the conclusion. I said that you're thinking that the presented evidence counts in favor of the conclusion. So, if I say, here's an example, maybe that's all true things. If I live in Brooklyn, then I live in New York City. So I live in Brooklyn. That's true, right? No matter where you live. I live in New York City. Therefore, I live in Brooklyn. All of those are true, let's say. But a person who inferred on the basis of those two sentences that was a true conclusion would not be factually incorrect about the state of the world, but they would be making a mistake about what follows from what, about what supports what counts as evidence for what. They've been making a rational mistake. They ought not to accept that conclusion on the basis of those premises.
So I think we could construe all of that without appealing to normative concepts.
But how?
Well, so if a person, like I would need to hear the exact specific details of something, but I would just say that to the extent that you accept the premises of a valid argument, then it just is the case that the conclusion is true. So if the premises are true and it's a valid argument, then the conclusion is true. Like that, there's just a fact about the relationship between those, independent of whether you believe it or whether you want to believe it. It does not follow from the fact that you believe that the argument is valid and you believe that the premises are true that you ought to believe the conclusion. It just follows that the conclusion is true. It just doesn't. So you could just talk about what is the case. You don't have to talk about what ought to be, what you ought to believe, because that's.
But then what do you do when you meet
issue.
someone who says no? They
They
say no to the conclusion, but accept the premises.
Then I would think that,
They say, I don't have to accept that conclusion. I see that maybe it's valid in your sense, but I don't need to accept it. Oh, I accept the premises, but who are you to tell me what to accept?
Sure, I would just say that they're adopting an epistemic procedure, at least in this local case, that's not conducive to holding true beliefs. I don't think that they ought to hold true beliefs. I don't know what that would mean. I would just think that they aren't holding true beliefs. So there's just a descriptive fact.
Yeah, well, what it would mean is that they ought to.
So I don't think that's necessary to explain what they're doing.
Yeah, so you're just a normative skeptic. That's the problem. We've been arguing about this other stuff, when really, if you can't even accept that you ought to believe the conclusion of a valid argument, then your problems are much worse than we thought at the beginning. I mean,
well, I think everyone else's problems are much worse.
Something much more rotten in Denmark than we thought, guys. This is pretty not good.
So I think the issue is that there's something deeply rotten in academic philosophy, is this mistaken conception of normativity.
But what's mistaken about it?
So I think normativity is just reducible to certain sorts of consistency relations, descriptive consistency relations. And I think normativity can just be eliminated or reduced completely. Yeah.
So, but how do you get, like, for example, the kind of question that Jock was trying to ask me earlier about alternative logic systems? So do you think that you can decide to adopt dialethism as your logic at will?
So that's just going to end up being a psychological question about what I'm capable of doing. I don't think I am, but maybe I am. I don't know. I met somebody that said that they didn't have any rational reasons for believing in Christianity, but they just chose to believe in it in spite of by what they said themselves. They said, I know it's not rational, but I chose to believe it anyway. I don't think I could do that. I don't know if you think people can't do that, I'm pretty sympathetic to that. So
no, they can do that. I meant, could you have a rational reason for adopting a logic, or an empirical reason even? Because, like the Quine-Putnam line is that, well, maybe we'll learn from science that the law of non-contradiction doesn't hold, or something like that. And
so I would just say is
worries.
There are, I am just interested in employing whatever procedure will most effectively achieve my goals. Whether we want to call that rationality or not, I don't especially
But care. Why ought you to achieve your goals?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, so you do understand the question. It's like, what reasons do you have for wanting to achieve your goals?
I don't think it makes sense to ask. To me, that's like asking, what reasons do you have for choosing to have blue eyes or something? I didn't.
So yeah, but you could have reasons, and you can make sense of the question, because I would like to choose to have different color eyes, and I can make sense of reasons for choosing. And maybe I didn't choose these ones. I can understand that, but the question itself makes sense.
But that's not the question. The question is why, what reasons do I have for the fact that my eyes are blue? What are the reasons for that? I don't think
it's about genetics.
So are we just offering,
those are the reasons? What are you talking about?
Are we offering causal reasons? Because if you wanted me to give you causal reasons for my values,
well, I'm saying that the kind of reason that you give is sensitive to the thing you're trying to give a reason for. So if it's a descriptive claim, you give a descriptive reason. If it's a normative claim, you give a normative reason.
Right. So I think that there's only the descriptive claims. I don't think there are.
Yeah, but you haven't established that. So you just.
Well, I don't think anyone's established that there's normativity. They're just saying that. So I can,
but we know that's it's more than that, though, because there are more me's than you's. So more of the ordinary persons in the universe go around saying, you're making a mistake when you reason this way. It's wrong of you not to accept the conclusion. And that's kind of the thing that I started at the beginning. The reason why I kind of more realist in the first place, because it makes better sense of what people do and how they live their lives. And yeah, there's some outliers, but I'm not going to throw away color theory because of colorblind persons.
But this is where I disagree.
So the outliers, I don't think are really serious contenders for me overturning what the mass majority of persons are going around doing already, and is implicit in their attitudes and the way that they're.
That is itself something I'm denying. I'm denying it's the case that most people are on your side.
Yeah, but go and accept the premises of modus ponens and deny the conclusion to see what people say to you.
Well, I would agree with him that I would be incorrect.
And
I don't know that
that's a mistake, and that you ought to accept this conclusion.
So, but we don't know what they mean when they say that. When they say,
I think I do.
I don't think. Well, it's an empirical question.
So the difference is, I don't know. See, to me, when I say the colorblind thing, I know you maybe take that as insulting. I don't mean it to be that way. I mean, like, it's just a description.
Oh, I don't think it's insulting. I just think it's flipping things and making it seem like I have the deficiency, when actually I think that's normative realists that have the deficiency.
Yeah,
I think there's something wrong
and
there.
it's an interesting question. Who is who? But so for me, it's like when I think about modus ponens, I have a profound and deep sense of rational compulsion. I feel compelled. Like, I feel like I have to, like, not even with any particular content. I just mean the schema of it. When I just look at it, if P then Q, I accept P, therefore Q. It just seems like there's a kind of pushing, like, I accept these, and we call that making an inference. And it is just something that you do, and you can feel it when you do it. You feel like, yeah, where else would I go? I have to go to that. And in the other case, you don't feel compelled, or you see how it's an illusionary, that you were mistaken, a sufficiency for necessity or something like that. So it just, I have this strong sense of experience of being forced to accept these things, even if I don't want to. And it seems like you're denying that. And maybe you don't have that experience, which is why I think maybe it's something like the color blindness case, or I'm hallucinating it in the pattern case. Like you said, one of us is, I mean, I don't know. I feel the same way about libertarian free will. Like, I have this strong sense that I make choices, but I could be wrong about it. It could be an illusion. So maybe the same thing is going on here, but I still think that the ordinary way that people act is more comporting with this sense. The things they say, the ordinary, when you teach logic, and people, I mean, some people say what you say and they don't give a shit about modus ponens. They're like, okay, I guess if it's true, I'll accept that. But they say the same thing about the invalid arguments. They say, well, the premises are true, so why shouldn't I be allowed to accept the conclusion on the basis of those? And I'm just like, I don't really know if there's more you can do than say, I guess you just don't feel the push from behind that the structure has, or that the.
So that's the thing, though. I do feel that push. So you said you have the strong experience of being forced to accept these things.
Yeah.
So do I. But I just take that to be a descriptive fact about my psychology. I don't take it to entail.
Why take it?
Because
so why take a feeling like that? You feel like you're being forced to be a descriptive fact. Yeah, it's a descriptive fact that you feel like you're being forced. But the feeling itself is imbued with normativity. You're feeling like
I don't think it is. I don't think it is imbued with normativity. Yeah, I do feel like I have to do things. I have compulsions, but I don't feel that I ought to act in accordance with my compulsions. I think
that's just a semantic term, because what I mean by ought is that you feel compelled.
Okay, but if that's what you mean by ought, then your ought claims are reducible to descriptive claims, exactly like I'm saying. So we could go around and just say it's a fact that people
descriptive claims, because it's so. The feeling, so maybe this is what Jacques was trying to get at before, the feeling of rational compulsion, or whatever you want to call it, this compelling experiential nature of the inference or the deduction or whatever you want to call it, that you can describe that, you have it, but what it's doing is the normative work. It's making it the case that you should accept the conclusion. It's giving you a justification, a reason to do it.
That is what I was getting. That is what I was getting at earlier. Thank you for.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what my digression about motivating and justifying reasons was supposed to eventually end with. There's got to be some connection between these two, and I think that's where they do connect. But I guess this is where we really disagree, because we're describing all the same stuff. It's just that you want to say no, it's purely normative, and that's what I want to say, that there's some normative component to it, and you want to say no, it can be done purely descriptively. But as soon as you start talking about compulsion, and that you can't not do it, I don't know, it doesn't seem
yeah, compulsion seems to me to better fit with the descriptive than a normative explanation. So if it just turned out that there's all these agents and they just feel compelled to do things and then they do them, I don't know at what point in explaining all of that we would need to say that they ought to do them. That just seems like unparsimonious. It just seems like this superfluous thing floating on top of it, almost like epiphenomenal. I don't see what we need that for.
To make sense of how they make mistakes, what it means to make a mistake, that you get it wrong sometimes, that you fail to do what was expected, those things, which,
Right.
So I still,
So,
you know,
but
you could be a compatibilist. I don't think I'm smuggling in any weird stuff here. I'm just saying that the way, you know, that's all that it says when you ought to do it, that someone would be making a mistake if they didn't do it.
So I would just understand making a mistake to, it could refer, like, because if someone says 2 + 2 = 5, we could say that like they've made a mistake in the sense that what they're saying is false, but we could also say that they made some sort of like inferential error. With respect to the latter one, I would just say that that is best described by a consistency relation between a hypothetical goal that they may or may not have and the means of acting consistently with that goal. And so we are just describing a consistency relation. We don't need to suppose that that person ought to conclude that 2 + 2 = 4, independent of whether it would serve their interests. We could say they ought to conclude it if they care about like having, like doing math in a way consistent with the rules of math. That's fine. But I see following the rules of logic.
No, they ought to do it if they care about rationality and consistency.
Well, so, but that's fine. But I don't think it's the case that people ought to care about rationality or consistency. I don't think that they have to.
But that's what the compulsion gives you.
Well, it depends what you mean by rationality, and it could just turn out to be the case a person lacks the compulsion. If a person just wasn't compelled by like modus ponens or something, I don't think it's the case that they ought to be.
Yeah, why not?
Well, because it may or may not serve their interests. So I would have
Who
just
cares if it
understand.
serves their interests?
Well, that's the only thing I'm talking about. Like I don't.
Yeah,
if
but
there's other
that's
stuff
not what we're talking about. So modus
But that's what I'm
ponens,
talking about.
universal instantiation, these things, if they didn't serve my purposes, I still should reason according to them. Because they
Well, what if
preserve
it
truth,
didn't
and
achieve your
truth
goal?
is truth preservation and goal accomplishment are different things, and maybe they coincide sometimes, but they're not the same.
Right. So I agree they're not the same. And that it's just like motivationally, like psychologically, I just want to do what achieves my goals. Now, it turns out that there are facts about what I'm compelled to do, independent of whether or not it's conducive to my goals. I just think that's an unfortunate feature about my psychology. I don't think it entails that I ought to like follow modus ponens, even if it would entail something that undermines my goals. I just think it could be true that I would be compelled to, even if it wouldn't. So like if I were confronted with a really good argument for a conclusion where if I accepted the conclusion, I would be so miserable, I would like die of misery. I think I would accept the conclusion, even though I would like it to be the case that I wasn't able to accept it. So like, I don't value truth.
But that's exactly what it means,
itself.
that you ought to accept it.
Well, I don't. So, but if that's the case, then we're just talking about, from my point of view, a descriptive.
It's like you ought to do things even if you don't want to do them. And there's a sense in which like you could do the other one, but there's something weighty pushing you to do this one.
Well, when you say something weighty pushing, I would just say that there are psychological facts about the way my like brain is constituted. I don't see a point of, like I don't see any extra thing. Because I think that that's most likely to be true. I think it's more parsimonious. I think it offers a better explanation. It's just capturing all of our observations and everything going on by appealing to the mundane descriptive facts about like human psychology.
Right, but that's already question, like you're begging the question and calling them mundane descriptive facts, when really like you've already baked in like everything you desire into the mundane facts, which I think the mundane facts go my way, because as we were saying, the story you're telling, I don't think accurately captures what people really do in the world or how they behave. You know, it's kind of the Hume point. Hume's a skeptic and is in Den, but then he jumps out of the way of the bus. You can't really behave like the way the skeptic wants you to. It's just not, you can't do it. No one's ever done it. Maybe Diogenes, or maybe he did, I don't know. But no one's ever really been able to do that. So what do you make of that? That it's just habit and we should go with you know, skepticism, or that there's something important in the fact that no one's ever been able to live their life that way? So
we're disagreeing about what the facts are and what best explains those facts.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the case that no one's ever lived their life that way. I in fact think it's the case that no one has ever needed. Maybe some people are like realists and they try to act in accordance however that would cause you to act. But I don't think it's the case that people have only ever lived in accordance with what you presume to be explanatorily necessary to account for what they're doing. I just don't think that that's true. It's like,
yeah,
I don't
but
think
even
I'm
if that's not the
acting
case, I think most people do. It's an empirical claim, but even if that's not the case, there's at least some people that do. And if you have ever so I told this person I would pick them up from the airport. but the Good Place season finale is on tonight. And I really want to watch that. And I don't even like that person very much anyway. So why did I tell them I would pick them up from the airport? And if, to me, having been in those situations, I've felt the pull. Well, I said I would do it. And the fact that I like them, why does that matter to the fact that I said I would do it? And yeah, to me, it's more important to find out what happened in the Good Place. I like philosophy better, and this is funny and relaxing. But to me, the sense of obligation, the feeling of I'm letting myself down, I'm letting them down, I'm doing something I ought not to do. I don't know. To me, that's a prevalent feature in my life. And I haven't always been a good person, not even close. I've been terrible, but I've always been like afterwards, eventually, hopefully at least, like, what the fuck? Why am I doing that? And ought I to be doing that? And what justifies my behavior? And not everybody does that, but some people do that. And more people should be like that. So I think that the people who do what you're saying, are failing to do something important. And even if the world descriptively comes out exactly the same. So because I do agree with the things that Jacques and you were saying at Fact Lance earlier, that really if realism were true or not true, what would change about the world? People still do all the things they do for the reasons that they have. I would still probably be deluded in thinking moral realism was true. You would be accurately believing in anti-realism. That would be the only real difference, but we still make all the same decisions probably, right? Maybe some people would say, finally, I can go and shoot all those people that I hated because nothing mattered. But maybe some people will be fine, finally, I can go and give to charity because, my religion was telling me not to help those people. So it might balance out, who knows? Now I went off on a rant. I forgot what the heck. Oh yeah. So what Jacques was saying earlier. No, I lost it again. I don't know. Anyway, so I agree with you that this stuff is complicated, but I still can't find it. I was going to say something so earth-shattering that you were going to totally agree with me.
I hate when that happens, when I'm like ready to say it and then it just goes woo, into the
it all hinged on something I said earlier.
It did too.
My skepticism
right. So that's what I was going to say is that even if I agree that there's no practical difference in a world where realism is true and a world where anti-realism is true, I still want to live in the world where realism is true. So it still seems important that it's true and to know whether it's true, even if it doesn't have any practical outcome at all. In the same way that I think knowing about Cantor's theorem is important, whether it has any practical applications. I think all higher order mathematics are interesting and should be pursued. Maybe someday they'll have applicability to the physical world, maybe not, but they're interesting in their own right and ought to be pursued. And so I think the same would be true about realism. I mean, even if we could never know it was true, it'd still be kind of cool that if it was true and there were like facts about what was right and what was wrong. And even if no one cared about it or did it, I don't know. So I think some people are more invested in like something would matter if it were true. And I'm like, it'd just be a way the world is. But I don't know, like, I mean, if you could prove it was true, maybe people would reason, people who cared about knowing what was true would convert to moral realism. I don't know. Maybe that would be a practical effect. I don't know. But other than that, it wouldn't really matter to me if there were.
I mean, about the closest I could come is to just say, I would like to know if it's true or not. Like if, some godly being can come and tell me, I'd want to know. I wouldn't say that it's important independent of me wanting to know or whatever instrumental value that would have.
So if you found out that like you ought to reason according to modus ponens, but you just didn't care about that, then you still wouldn't care about it.
Right, exactly. So, this is something that I bring up with moral realists because I do think it's relevant not to whether moral realism is true or not, but whether it's trivial or not. If it turned out that there were these, objective moral facts, and the moral facts required me to do something I didn't want to do, I just wouldn't do it. Like I don't, and maybe someone could say, if you were in the mind space of someone that genuinely accepted that they were moral facts, they would necessarily be motivating, even if defeasibly. that might be true, but I don't know how to I don't know how to simulate that. I don't know what that would be like. So if they're not necessarily motivating, as far as I could tell, I wouldn't care what the facts were. So the moral facts were motivationally. Like I might care that they're true. I might be like, oh, that's an interesting thing that it turns out it's true that you should torture puppies, but I'm not going to actually go out and torture a puppy. I just wouldn't care. I don't think most moral realists would. And I think if they did, I think it would be because they valued doing what was objectively morally right or wrong. And so it would still be in a certain, I think non-trivial, like a certain important sort of way, that the only way anyone would ever act in accordance with the stance-independent moral facts is if those stance-independent moral facts were in some way the sort of thing that they cared about in virtue of their stance-dependent concerns and values. And so in a certain way, I still see even the strongest type of moral realism that I can conceive of as in a certain way sort of subordinate to what we value stance-dependently.
Yeah, well, that may be true, but I don't know. I don't see what reason to think that. I mean, so one way the world could be is like, what if Socrates was right? The good is intrinsically motivating, and to know it is to desire it and to be, drawn to it or whatever. That's sort of the idea of rational compulsion in a sense. So it could be like that. Maybe it isn't. But the only thing that matters to me is that I get to call cat kickers immoral, and that what they're doing is wrong, and that they shouldn't do it. And if you don't care about that stuff, then great, but it still seems to me true that it's wrong and you shouldn't do it. And so if you do it, then you're doing something wrong. That's the only thing that matters to me, is that those things are factually correct statements about persons and their actions. Whether those persons care about them seems to me completely neither here nor there. I mean, I wish they did actually, but
Mm-hmm. So
all I care about is the moral victory.
Yeah. So, there's this quote from David Lewis that I think encapsulates exactly my view on this. So I'll just read that. He says,
Okay.
Why care about objective value or ethical reality? The sanction is that if you do not, your inner states will fail to deserve folk theoretical names, not a threat that will strike terror into the hearts of the wicked. But whoever thought that philosophy could replace the hangman? So that's the perspective I have about this. So it's just like, I just care about, so and with regards to rationality, when I'm trying to decide what I want to do, I just want to achieve my goals. So if someone says, hey, it turns out like the correct account of rationality is such that you ought to act in a way that is not optimistic with respect to achieving your goals, then I guess I don't want to be rational. And then like, I just care about like smashinality, which is whatever like decision theory would allow me to achieve my goals most effectively. So
I mean, that's really lucky for us that you aren't a psychopath. I mean, hopefully, but like the random assortment of accidental goals that you ended up with as a result of your history, contingent place and society, etc. I don't want to, so the person, I don't know. So to me, like, authenticity is great unless you're a serial killer, in which case don't be authentic. Like, go fuck yourself. Like, if you want to be a mass murderer, start with yourself first. That's always been my motto. Like, you first, buddy. So I just don't, it's just pure luck that you weren't a person who started with those goals, apparently, is what you're saying. But
that's always been your motto.
But if you start with yourself, you first. But if you had those goals, it seems like what you're saying is, you just proceed, figure out how to be the best pedophile, the best serial killer, the best whatever. And that just seems, it's lucky for us that you didn't have those, but it just seems like there's something clearly mistaken about simply starting with some assortment of goals and then only caring about maximizing the success rate of the goals achievement, and no assessment of the goals, given that you didn't assign them yourselves. They showed up randomly. It seems completely bizarre to just say, I'm going to disregard wondering about where they come from, why they're there, and just pursue them.
But when you say I disregard where they come from and why they're there, I mean, that's just manifestly not true. I mean, I specialize in moral psychology, not even moral philosophy. And like, I literally study the origins of people's moral beliefs. And they're
not yours, though.
Sure, I think about it. Why wouldn't I?
Well, what do you mean? You just said you don't. You just said you have goals and then you try to figure out how to pursue them.
Yeah, but I think that
you said you don't even know what it means to wonder about whether you should or ought to have these goals.
I agree with that. But
well, that's what we're talking about.
That's not what I interpret as like why I have the goals. Why I have the goals, I think, are just causal. They're like causal historical claims.
Yeah, so it's like it's really lucky that you didn't start from some other causal historical starting point, because given your lack of commitment to assessment of the goals, then you would have just pursued the really terrible goals.
Right, but
so suppose you didn't want a PhD in philosophy, or you wanted to be the best mass murderer in history. I guess, it sucks for us that you know how to maximize your goals.
I think the substantive normative content of moral realist views, I consider it fortunate that they tend to not be psychopaths, but I think that that's due to causal historical effects about what's caused them to have the normative moral beliefs they have. And I don't think that those are contingent on like moral realism being true. So
no, but it's contingent on understanding what it means to ask the question whether you ought to have the goals you do.
Right, but I don't think that I think that they're all confused about that. So like from my point of view, it's very fortunate that moral realists don't happen to have realist intuitions that like they need to torture everybody. Like that's fortunate too. So yeah, like totally there's just fortunate. A parallel anti-realist like thing where we're very fortunate that realists don't think that they're like objectively mandated to go out torturing and killing people. So it's the same thing on both ends.
Yeah, no, I agree, but we can give a reason why the realists aren't mandated, and it makes sense of why morality requires you not to do things of that nature. But on your view, it's just an accidental, happy, lucky fact that you are this way and not that way. But it's not an accidental, happy, lucky fact that certain things are, but certain things are not. I try very hard to avoid doing them and correct myself when
I do think it's an accidental lucky fact. I think it's an accidental lucky fact that realists are mistaken into thinking that the objective moral facts are ones that I don't disapprove of. That's what makes it lucky to me.
But it's not lucky since we can give reasons and there's an argument and some evidence even maybe. But on your side, it's just luckiness in the true sense that it's historical and causal. And that had it been different, it would have been very different. But I can't even make sense of anything being different such that 2 + 2 was 5,000.
Yeah, so I think that this is assuming this is assuming the substantive normative content of the moral facts that realists endorse like actually are the facts. They could have been any other set of facts. I don't see any logical problem with that. So I don't.
Well, they couldn't have, just like their logical facts couldn't have been any other than they are.
But that's something I would deny. But I'm an anti-realist.
How could the logical facts have been other than they are?
I don't think the logical facts can be other than they are. I think it's the case that moral realism is not true, and that it is possible that humans could have like evolved differently or have different cultural histories, and that as a result, they're convinced that the objective moral facts are like we have to skin babies all day or something. So I think it's fortunate.
But they also could have been convinced that 2 + 2 was 27.
Sure.
So.
Well, they would be incorrect about what 2 + 2 equals in that case.
Same with the babies.
Yeah, but I don't think there's a fact of the matter.
So why think that they would be incorrect about 2 + 2 equals 27? They would just say, your rational intuition about how to follow the rules and apply them in this case is mistaken.
Well, it would just be a tautology. It would be like someone saying like there would be a tautology error. I don't think there'd be a tautology in morality. I don't think it's a tautology to say it's the objectively morally right thing to do is to skin babies. It's not.
It's a tautology to say it's morally wrong to unjustifiably skin babies.
Right, but then you're just saying
a tautology.
That's true, but it's like a trivial one. So
no, it's pretty substantive.
I don't think it is.
But why not?
Because it's just like saying it's wrong to do something that is wrong by stipulation.
Well, that's not stipulation. That's just analyticity.
I don't think
mathematical truths. Some of them are like that as well. X = X. So.
Sure, but someone could.
Wouldn't you rather somebody be wrong about the number case than the skinning babies alive case?
Well, I don't know. If people were really bad at math, then we wouldn't be able to do a whole lot of stuff that we do.
No.
Like if they were incapable of doing math correctly.
I wouldn't drive on any bridges.
Exactly. So no, I think that would have pretty serious consequences. Like we couldn't land probes on Mars. We couldn't have satellites. We probably couldn't do computer programming.
I was just denying that math gets its value from its practical application. But I agree that it does have tons of, we're lucky it does have tons of practical applications, but that's not the reason why I follow the rules of math or respect.
But actually, I don't know if psychologically that's why I follow the rules of math. but like, just that's, I care about stuff because it's out, because
Well, yeah, like
it's
so
consistent with
like
my
a
goals.
like a broad failure of obeying the laws of math could have a bunch of consequences. But let's say like a single failure of doing a math problem versus a single failure of not realizing you shouldn't skin babies alive. It seems like the singular failures, like the baby one, seems like there's
Well,
more
to
weight
me,
on.
the failure is the same. The consequences are different. There's both a failure of reason in both cases, to failure to recognize an inference, an implication of something which you accept. But the consequences of one failure are drastically, and one, I mean, it depends on how you specify the case, because if, like you were saying, the failure in this case is, well, it's going to fail in a bridge that there's going to be a parade on, and 100,000 people will plummet to their death, and then one baby being skinned. Gee, utilitarians are going to go nuts over that one. I don't know, but so depending on how you flesh it out, the consequences are going to be severe, but the failing is the same. This is kind of what Kant meant when he said that it's just as wrong to tell a lie as it is to kill someone unnecessarily. And people say, what the hell? Oh my God. Well, Kant said, no, in both cases, you're doing something irrational. It's that the failing is the same. The consequences may be different. And then he gives this whole big argument about, how do you know what the consequences are anyway? And the liar at the door, blah, blah, blah. You may have, so you can't reason about consequences to begin with, because once you play that game, then all bets are off, and hamada. So, but anyway, I don't want to get too distracted with all the, lying murderer cases. Should you lie to save someone's life, which people get all offended about? And Kant says, no, by the way, that you shouldn't. By the way, I always like the Jesuit answer, which is the most respectable answer to Kant's question. What should you say to the murderer at the door? They say, where's your friend? Where's Bob? I'm gonna slit his throat. And the right answer is to say, we don't want any Girl Scout cookies, and close the door. You don't have to answer the question. You don't have to lie, dude. Like, why? Everyone's like, just attack the person, punch him in the throat, like shut the door. You don't have to say he's over there. So I just think that these questions are very difficult. There's no doubt about it, right? But people's intuitions about, like, is it moral to lie in this case, track the consequences. Like, oh, if you don't lie, then someone's life will be lost. And isn't their life more valuable than telling the truth? And in terms of consequences, yeah, but in terms of like what you did that was wrong, I do sort of see Kant's point that there's the same thing is being done. In some abstract sense, a failure of rationality is a failure to understand that you owe the other person something.
Of course, that's the thing we disagree about, though. So what I'm saying is that conditional and anti-realism being true, it's fortunate that moral realists happen to not have really like violent, malicious stuff. And I just think it's fortunate with respect to my goals. So I think I might just be saying something that only makes sense within the framework of like conditional on me being correct, which you don't agree with. So you don't have to agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I just, again, let's say, go back to the thing about the goals thing. It just seems like, again, we're lucky that you don't have the strange goals, but you're not lucky that I don't have weird. I mean, actually you are, because, this is total non sequitur maybe, but I don't know if you're familiar with this paper by Bernard Williams, the philosopher. And I even forget the name of the paper actually, but it's this, do you know who Bernard Williams is, by the way? Just offhand, you do? Lance? Yeah,
but I'm not familiar with Bernard Williams.
He's a really cool thinker, but it's hard for me to really know what his real views are. He's a subtle guy, but anyway, this paper that I'm speaking about is sort of controversial, so trigger warning. He's comparing Huck Finn and what's described there between Tom Sawyer and the freed slave, and the diary of Himmler, the Nazi dude. And the interesting comparison here is that in the Huck Finn case, we see the person motivated by feelings of friendship and companions. And like, they want to save this freed slave, mostly because they know him and not because of some abstract principle of justice and equality and, all that stuff. But it's like, I know this guy, this is my friend, I want to free him. And in the other case, you find this very bizarre, topsy-turvy reflection on how he's so sad and anguished about killing all these Jewish persons, and how they look at him and they're suffering and he just feels terrible. But duty and morality and reason and duty commands him to fulfill this, and he's got to do what duty requires. And it's sort of like the case that you're talking about, I think, Lance, where like this guy has horrible values actually, but he thinks that he's obligated to do this stuff. And I think, the Williams point was kind of like, we have this debate in the history of philosophy about whether reason and duty, or whether the emotions are what's the important motivator. And then sometimes there are cases where the emotions motivate us to do what's right. And there are some cases where duty, following it blindly, motivates us to do what's wrong. And so the picture is really complicated, I think. So that's what I was saying, is that when you're saying, is it lucky that the moral realists don't have these horrible views? I think that, the Himmlers of the world, they were moral realists, probably. And that's terrible. That the fact that they were moral realists. Now, whether they were moral anti-realists, would they still have done what they did? I don't know. But it certainly is hard to read a person who's talking about murdering a bunch of innocent persons and then talking about his duty and how he has to do it. It's shocking, actually, to see that. But it really brings out the point you're making, I think, which is that you have to be careful, because if blind commitment to reason and duty does end up leading to some disastrous consequences. But I'm not advocating blind commitment to reason and duty. I'm advocating commitment to rational reflection and consistent logical consistency. And I think that the Himmler was definitely irrational for not recognizing the sorts of things that we've been talking about. So I'm not trying to condone what he's doing or anything. I'm just trying to point out that I think your point's very serious, the one that you jokingly made about the realists not having the horrible views.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I think in some sense that it is luck, but more than luck, I think we can give arguments for why those views are wrong. Whereas, like I was saying again, in the case that sort of you're talking about, you can't. You just have to say, this is a brute fact about my psychology, that I have these goals. And actually, I don't have the goal of like caring about my goals, and that's a brute fact. And also, it's a brute fact that there's no reason for me to care about doing that. And in fact, that's not even a meaningful question. So you have to like brute fact your way pretty deep down the rabbit hole to get to where you are, but you don't have to do that to get to where I am.
Well, I mean, that framing makes it seem like I'm appealing to all these brute facts in a way that makes my position less simple, but I actually think it's simpler, because I think that you have this entire normative framework that you want to seat on top of the descriptive facts, and I just don't think it's necessary to explain anything. In a lot of these cases, you would agree on the descriptive facts I'm talking about and then bring in additional normative facts. So all the brute facts I'm talking about, I think, would be facts that if we examine the evidence, you would have to accept anyway, and then you just have extra facts. So I don't think I have extra facts here. I don't think the question is whether my account would be
no, it's not that you have extra, it's that you have brute.
Well, when I say brute, I just mean that there are certain sorts of psychological facts about people, and I think that that's all that there is. So
yeah, exactly. That's what I mean too. Whereas I mean that we can have reasons for having the certain psychological facts, and we ought to have some and not others, and we should strive to get better ones and so forth.
Right, I get that, but it sounded like you were framing it as though I believe in a bunch of stuff that's like and maybe you weren't trying to do this, but like I have all this stuff that like I'm not explaining, or it's not parsimonious, or I have all this extra phenomena, and I don't think that's the case. I think that
I do think that's the case. That you're not explaining why you ought to pursue the goals you have. You don't think you need to explain that, but
right, exactly.
Yeah. So I do think you're not explaining something.
So so you think that there's extra stuff in need of explaining, and then I'm not explaining it. So if that's the case, then there would be. I wouldn't say that my position is like less parsimonious. I would say it's explanatorily inadequate.
And that's what brute means in my language. It means that you're stipulating something that deserves an explanation.
Okay, so if that's the case, then that's not what I mean by brute facts. I would just say that there are descriptive facts, and there's like not anything extra to explain. And I would just compare it to like this notion of like Elaine Vital or vitalism or something, where if we look at like what distinguishes living from non-living things, what I think we could do is just explain all like the biochemical facts and whatever kind of scientific facts. And there isn't like this vital force or protoplasm or magic stuff in Elaine Vital you would have to explain in addition. I just deny there's an extra thing to explain. And I'm just saying, and not that you have to accept that the analogy is true, but I'm saying I'm analogizing that to like human psychology and moral behavior and judgment and that sort of thing. And I'm saying that like once we explain the descriptive facts about human morality, there aren't any other facts that we need to account for. And so the argument is going to come down to whether I'm failing to appreciate that there are these additional considerations that, if true, yeah, I'm completely failing. Like, not only am I not explaining them, there's something way wrong with me because I'm not even noticing that they're there. So if you're right, I'm making like pretty catastrophic mistakes.
Yeah, and if you're right, then I'm talking nonsense. Or not nonsense, but making meaningless assertions, which probably aren't even really assertions since they don't have any meaning. But once again, so I agree with everything you just said. I think that's exactly right. But I just don't understand why you think that. So it seems to me to want to go around the same circle again. It seems to me obvious that you should ask the question about what our goals are and whether you should have them.
Well, so I could say a bit that because I don't think we want to like relitigate the same thing like 50 times. So like in my own case, like I don't. So and maybe this just isn't your view because the kind of view that you're putting forward is different from the kinds of moral realist views that I typically encounter.
Yeah.
The majority of people I talk to are non-naturalist realists that are closer in the way that they frame things as Parfit, humor, Schaefer-Landau. Sometimes I talk to moral naturalists, and there's like a whole different set of things I would want to say to moral naturalists.
No, I know those guys as well, and I would have more sympathy with like the Cornell realism sorts of things than I would with like the Schaefer-Landau stuff. But that's why I like constructivism though, which is why I was trying to defend that.
Right. So constructivism, I don't even know if I've ever had like an extended discussion with a constructivist. So it's really great to have one. In fact, I think someone recently asked me, have you ever talked to a constructivist? And I said, I don't think so. It's mostly non-naturalists. But so at the very least, so the constructivism thing would be a whole separate thing. And maybe if we talk about it more, like I can conceive of being brought on board with the constructivist stuff with a higher degree of like, maybe that would be cool with me. And then it might just come down to like terminological distinctions. Like I'd be like, I'm fine with accepting that, but I super duper don't want to call it realism. But that could just end up being some like, I don't want to be associated with like Parfit and humor and Schaefer-Landau conceptions of realism. At least with respect to them, what I tend to say is that I like a lot of what like humor might appeal to something like phenomenal conservatism and say it seems to him that like torturing babies is wrong and that seems like it's like stance independently true.
Right.
When I talk to them, what I tend to report in those cases is that I lack that psychology. Like I don't have that phenomenology. Or if I do, I somehow am not aware that I have it. It could be self-deception. I don't know what's going on. But when I really try to introspect on like torturing babies for fun, I just think, oh, I don't like that. I don't want people to do it. I want to stop people from doing it. There's all these like dispositional and psychological facts I could report about my attitude about that. I think it's really bad. But like, I don't have the stance independent stuff. It's like not part of my intuitive profile, and it's not part of something. It's not phenomenologically accessible to me. And so
that's the part that I have trouble understanding, because when you say it's not stance independent, what that seems to imply is that someone who felt differently from you would basically conclude weird, but not have any real reason to want to stop them, except for that it offended you or something like that. But
that's how I think about it. Yeah, like
that's insane. That to me is like.
My moral attitudes phenomenologically feel identical to like my food preferences. The only thing that's different about that is like the substantive like function. So like,
that's why I was doing the color blindness thing earlier, because that's where I really think that there's either one of us is inflating something or the other one's missing something. Because I do think that
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's either going to turn out that I'm colorblind in some sense, at least if we're talking about the non-natural stuff, because with the, like naturalists, maybe like I'm just not understanding their positions or it's terminological or whatever. But maybe it's the same thing. But so they want to say, and I've had several people suggest this, maybe Humor did or somebody else, I don't know. I've had at least 2 or 3 people suggest that I have some sort of analogous deficiency of colorblindness. I don't find it offensive because I understand the point isn't to say
it's not a personal attack. It's just trying to say like, well, how do you make sense of people disagree about this stuff?
So I don't take it as a personal attack. I have had people float it before. And I that would, like, if it turned out that was the case, it would explain why, like, I'm not able to grasp the concepts that they're appealing to and that sort of thing. And that's fine. And I think you agree that would just turn out to be an empirical question. And I would be receptive. Like, if someone could show me empirical evidence, like they're like, look, you don't have the moral cortex in your brain. Like, it's just not there. Like,
Galapagos from Dogman. Or Underpants.
So if that was the case, then I would be like, crap, it looks like I have some deficiency. But I'm interested in that hypothesis But what I suspect is that there's actually something psychologically going on with many realists, especially ones that like argue for like moral perception or claim that they can like detect or see moral facts.
I tend to agree with them, by the way, but I tend to think that because I think perception is theory laden, and then you come to accept certain things are moral, and then you see them because theory ladenness. But I
might
don't
be
think
fine with that kind of moral perception.
Yeah, right. Exactly, because I don't buy the non-natural, like you just perceive some non-natural property of wrongness.
Yeah, because I could like perceive like a Canadian citizen. I don't think that they have Canadian citizenness.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know. So, but like I can see Canadian citizens. So yeah, no, that makes sense. But you do have ones that are like they'll claim that there's like qualia that like one like acquaintance with those qualia gives one the like immediate knowledge of the things having intrinsic value. That's the sort of thing where I'm going to take some issue with.
Yeah, no, I would also. Yeah. Right. I'm much more on board like with the like humanism about like the background psychological stuff, except for rationality bit. And then I would want to put the normativity. Right. That's where I really, want to put my cards on the table. But yeah, go ahead.
I think it's possible that we could find out that there's something that there's like a psychological, it's not a color blindness, it's like something extra. So, there are people that are more likely to see like Jesus in toast, or yeah, exactly. there are people that have like synesthesia. And like you can imagine a scenario, right? You can imagine a scenario where for whatever weird quirk of evolution, like a big chunk of the population, 70, 80% of people evolved to have like color number synesthesia. And so they're all like, hey, 7 is blue, right? Yeah, 7's blue. And like, I think they would all be wrong, but they could have this like incorrigible sense that like 7 is blue. And we could just imagine like the synesthesia, it wasn't like random, which numbers were associated with which colors. It's like, they all worked out in the same way. Like
yeah,
it's
like
weird.
Odd ones were red or yellow, and
yeah, like all odd numbers are fuzzy or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then it could turn out that you could have all these people that would have this sense that they're just like, look, when I think about 7, it's blue. All my friends over here think about 7, it's blue. And then we went and studied with philosophy. It still seems blue. So like, we get to say the number 7 is blue unless you can provide like defeaters for that.
Right.
They might even be justified in saying that. So I'm not even going to go around and tell moral realists necessarily. Like I have concerns about their position and the intelligibility, blah, blah, blah. But like, even if they're justified in thinking it, like, I still want to know like whether they're justified or not, whether they're right. What that's going to end up taking is doing the psychological work to look at like the psychological causes of their beliefs. And it could go either way. It could turn out that I will identify some empirical reasons to be skeptical of what moral realists are claiming, or maybe I won't. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like what you're saying, and I think that's a cool project because
Lance, did you? Sorry,
yeah, sorry. Just gonna say just quickly though that we should modify people to see it even if it isn't there.
So here's what I would say: if I would be willing to like agree that that's true, if it turned out that there would be like practical benefits. And I suspect that the kinds of benefits you would consider benefits, like I'm mostly going to be on the same page about what those are. So I could be convinced of that too. Like I don't have any problem with like conceptual engineering. I might end up being like favor conceptual engineering of like fictionalism, where like I don't think there are objective moral facts, but we've got to convince everybody that there are, even if they don't already think that. I would be on board with that. It's going to turn on empirical facts. I'll be right back. So yeah, give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't know you were sick. I feel bad.
Oh, I know. I feel bad.
Oh yeah, you're the one who feels bad. Yeah. I feel it. Sometimes
I'm making a joke. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, no, I don't feel good.
Yes, you underestimate my empathic abilities, where I can actually feel everything that you feel.
Oh man, it's been rough because this is like the third illness we've had, my family. Like we got the influenza virus. We know because we've been getting all the tests. So we got influenza and it went through everyone, basically 5 days a person. And then we got the stomach flu after that, rotavirus, all exits, no waiting. And now it's a cold. So every time I go back for the COVID test, it's like negative, like all of us, but so it's just like, that once a month, so January, February, and that's almost March. Yeah, it's been 3 months of just like one. I feel like, I don't know if it's just because, I'm back on the train going to work and stuff and son's in school and everything. So maybe we're just circulating more, but yeah, just getting everything.
All right. So I have a few questions from some people who there's some questions that are so ridiculous. I'm not going to ask them, but
No, ask the ridiculous ones.
yeah. I mean, there was the guy who just kept asking whether you guys would like to shoot people if you could.
Oh, I mean, I played Grand
that's
Theft
maybe
Auto
more of
for
a question.
that, you know.
Yeah, that's more of a question for Lance probably. But I mean, I think his answer is just no. I imagine.
Yeah,
I have no
I
desire to do that.
there is this like if I say the sorts of things that I do, often there's this impression, which like Richard has not made this assumption, but like sometimes people do that. Like if you report the kind of position that I have, that means that you like are cool with killing people and you have
you're actually saying your values are not that. You just don't understand exactly what reasons there are to have those other ones. No, totally.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like a consistent theme throughout this whole debate has been people saying that Lance has no understanding of Kant and that Richard has no understanding of logic and reasoning.
Interesting. Can you substantiate any of that?
I mean, I'm not gonna do it.
Well,
These are the I mean,
I think I have a pretty good understanding of logic and reasoning, so I would like to challenge that assertion.
It didn't. Well, let's see. Somebody's typing. Maybe they do have something to say, but I'll wait for their essay. Yeah. Okay. So one person asks about your guys' intuitions about effective altruism and wild animal suffering. So, I mean, I know Richard's position on wild animal suffering, but I actually don't know either of your guys' intuition on effective altruism.
Our intuition on it? What is it?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Some people hate it and think it's ineffective, or I don't know that it's not I don't know what the criticism is, but some people are really critical of it.
Yeah, there's various criticisms. Some of them might be good criticisms of this specific way people are implementing or thinking about or talking about effective altruism. That seems fine to like criticize it, like the details, but the general idea that we should do our best to figure out how to help others and do it. What would be the reason for being against that? Of course, I'm in favor of that. There's a question.
One reason it might be that you're using utilitarian means to allocate things that ought to be done in maybe a different way as prioritize. So there's some assumptions about what you're trying to do is maximize utility, right? And that's what effective altruism is about. I'm not against maximizing utility. I just don't know if that's like the best way to maximize morality. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying that's what I think maybe you could have some questions.
Right. Yeah. So that would just be subsumed by the sorts of criticisms I think would be fine to just be. So, if an effective altruist said, okay, but I'm an effective altruist and I'm not a utilitarian, I'm actually a deontologist, like the criticism just wouldn't apply. So I think the effective altruist community has pushed quite a bit to say, look, you don't have to be a utilitarian to be an effective altruist.
Cool. And yeah, I'm totally ignorant of that. So I would like to read about that actually.
Yeah, there's probably this is stuff that I looked at years ago and I haven't looked at it in a long time. But yeah,
I wonder why the asker specifically mentioned wildlife suffering in context of EA. So is there supposed to be some is the idea that maybe there's a conflict because we ought to prioritize one even though EA doesn't or something like that?
Perhaps the asker could give more context on that, but I think a lot of it has to do with, I always associate wild animal suffering with like negative utilitarianism, but I think that their idea is, because I actually know the person who wrote this question, so I'm going to interpret what they mean here. But I think they're asking are we obligated to do something about it? Like, should we go and round up predators? Should we?
Yeah, my view is 100% yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we should extinguish predation. Like it's a moral obligation to get rid of it.
If we could do it, we should do it.
Yeah. Okay. And then I have a question here. This is kind of my type of question that I would ask. This is probably okay. So the question is, why ought we be rational? This is directed at Richard, I think.
Why ought you be rational?
Right.
Because it's rational to be rational. There's no answer to that question. It's like a self-justifying claim. You can't help it.
All right. So it's just You're just it's a thing you're compelled to do, or what? Like,
Yeah, I don't think you get a choice.
okay, you don't get a choice to be rational, or that you ought to be.
That you ought to be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So
you can. People are irrational. That is for sure. But I
yeah.
don't. It's like you. So this is the same question. Why ought you to be moral? What reason can you give to be moral? What reason can you give to be rational? It's like something that's foundational. You can't. I don't think in some real sense. Notice that I don't think you can do much more than kind of point out that it's there. And that certain things follow from it, but I don't think you can give a reason why you ought to be rational. I'd like to know what reason would count as one to avoid it.
Lance, what are your intuitions on this question here? Why ought we be rational? Or you just don't think we ought to do?
He already know. I'm already got an answer for him to get what you want.
Yeah. Okay.
That works.
To get what you want.
Yeah, to maximize your goal preferences, which is what he's been arguing for this whole time, which is what reason is for, is to connect your where you are to where your goals are and to get you from there to there in a way that's maximizes the most of them.
Yeah, I mean, that might be one way to put it. I'm more inclined to say that I don't think that given my point of view, the question makes sense, but
the question.
See, we agree on that, right? That from a certain point of view, it doesn't make sense to ask why you ought to be rational.
Well, yeah, okay. So the questioner clarified and said, I guess we could break down the ought into prudential, epistemic, and moral categories and see if different answers pop out from that.
That would be like that might just like recapitulate a lot of what we've already said. So
yeah,
I don't know.
All right. And then Kane Baker adds that he thinks it's very coherent to ask why ought we be rational. Thanks, Kane. Okay.
What kind of answer would you give to that?
Okay, he says, so the question seems coherent to me, and I think I can give reasons for continuing to use reason. Wait, what? Wait, what? Sorry, there's a lot of things. A lot of people are writing stuff, and it's like throwing all the other questions back up. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? I'm kind of like trying to catch up with like all these things that are popping.
You guys got a super chat, man. Give the guy some money.
Thanks. So let's see here. It seems like when you say what we can understand too. All right, never mind. That's way too convoluted.
All right, Kane, we know you're right about everything, man. Come
on. Yeah, he was responding to someone else too.
We'll have to talk about it some other time because I'd like to hear what he has to say about that.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have a question. Yeah, I think we're out of coherent questions. There's like some spamming and other things that so I think,
okay, cool.
I think we're
I mean, so one thing I would just say in closing about this question is, like my philosophical hero Sartre, he ultimately did conclude that that freedom was absolute in this, the existentialism, French cigarette smoking in the cafe sort of way, that there was like this ultimate libertarian free will, and that one had to even choose to be rational, that even being rational itself was a choice, that one had to make the choice to value it, and that one could coherently choose not to value rationality. And that, so in a certain sense, he was repudiating some things he had said previously about this. And I that's how I interpreted that anyway. But I don't know, to me, it doesn't seem like you have a choice. I think even Lance agrees that, he's compelled to reason according to certain valid argument forms, and he could describe it in non-normative terms, and that's, we've seen him do that. But I think that what's going on there is that we come with rationality. There's a practice which we're trained into. We're taught certain words, modus ponens, universal instantiation, etc. But we were reasoning long before we had those terms. Just to understand basic things requires universal instantiation, law of identity, all those things. To even understand questions about alternative logics and dialethism requires a background rational frame. to even assess whether or not we should accept dialethism or classical logic requires background rational capabilities. So I just think it's, what more can you do? Some things are fundamental. That's not like.
I wanted to ask you this question about like, so there's a park like within like a minute walking distance from where I live, and the squirrels there are all like, they're like very tame kind of squirrels, and they have this kind of behavior where like they clearly like assess you to like determine whether you're trustworthy or not, and they do a bunch of things, but it seems like an assessment behavior, like they're literally
they flex their tail at you.
Yeah, they do things, and then they either move closer to you or reject you, or and it seems like they're not determined what they're going to do, and there's like a series of things that happen which seem like trusting more, distrusting more, and going back and forth, maybe not determining something. And like, do you think that animals reason, and that like these are like prototypes of reasoning, this kind of thing? Like, is this guy going to kill me? Is he going to give me a peanut? Like, and I'm going to move forward, I'm going to move away a little bit, and I'm going to keep doing these behaviors until there's some kind of outcome. And because it seems like the squirrels in this park, because everybody's nice to them and gives them food, the trusting, that's just automatic for most of them, actually. So like they've established in this squirrel community that you can trust people, and it's easier for them than a squirrel you would see in some other town. So I just wonder, like, do you see like these things in animals as prototypes for a reason, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rudiments of morality are in animals. I think they can be described in ways where they deliberate. Do they grasp normative concepts? In some sense, I think that you can interpret some of the studies about monkeys, and their behaviors with respect to, the famous grape rewarding study. You guys know that study, right? They have the monkeys carry these things or something, and then they give one a cucumber and the other a grape, and they love the grapes. They're meh towards the cucumber, and the cucumber monkey gets very upset.
They get pissed off by the unfairness. Like,
well, that's the natural interpretation, I would say. It's debatable. That's what's in their debate, is whether they're pissed off by the unfairness. But if they are pissed off by the unfairness, then it seems like they're reasoning about, in some sense, rudimentarily, same work equals same outcome. Like, we did the same thing. Why did he get the good reward and I got the crappy reward? Now, maybe that's anthropomorphization, but it certainly is a natural interpretation of what's going on there. And you would need to do all sorts of real, more serious science to even get close. I mean, the whole issue of like, do animals have theory of mind, or is it just, it's so vexed, and it's so hard to even know like what would count as a good experiment that did or didn't answer that question. It's just like, oh, well, the monkey grabbed it when he wasn't looking. Oh, well, he didn't know he wasn't looking. He just saw his eyes were pointed in that way. And then there's 15,000 years of journal debate about whether this monkey recognizes that his eyes are in a different direction, or whether he knows he's looking in a different direction. So, because looking is a psychological term, but eyes being oriented is just a descriptive term, you see. So one requires that the monkey sort of attribute to the other a mental state, and the other just has them sort of judging the angle of the pupil and where it's directed. So I don't know. To me, those questions are very, very difficult. And I don't really want to pin my case on like yes or no. Certainly, I find it suggestive that there are rudiments there. And I do think that it's reasonable to think that animals deliberate. And some animals clearly approach what we might call reason. It's a graded scale, which is what you expect in nature and evolution.
So, I did find another question I thought was kind of interesting. So somebody asked like about Lance's intuitions about consciousness and whether he's a physicalist, a dualist, or an idealist.
Well, there's a difference between my intuitions and like what my position.
Your position. You can interpret it either way. I don't think it matters.
So I was always inclined towards something kind of like Dennett's illusionism, but I started to have having concerns about whether people actually have this notion that there are qualia, or whether people are subject to a user illusion. And I started to suspect that the sense that there is a hard problem of consciousness, or that people think that they have qualia or whatever, was itself like a mistake that is the result of academic philosophy, and that this whole notion that there's even something meaningful to talk about qualia or like what its likeness, that's all just an unintelligible mess. I tend to think lots of things in philosophy are unintelligible messes. Maybe I'm just terrible at understanding things. I certainly hope not.
I know your own teacher, I would quote your own former instructor and admonish you to try harder.
Yeah, I think I try real hard.
Refrain, by the way, that's the joke.
Yeah. So this is, the meta ethics stuff is basically what I do all day. So I'm trying as hard as I can.
I was talking about consciousness, but.
Oh, sure. So what, and Richard, this might turn out to be kind of funny, but just about 2 or 3 months ago, I came across Pete Bendick's paper on qualia quietism.
Yeah.
And like is it meta illusion?
Meta illusionism, qualia quietism.
Yeah, and I was like, bingo, there you go. So I basically just agree with that paper.
Wow.
So qualia quietism and meta illusionism.
Yeah, that's a good paper. I don't agree with it.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
But I like Pete, and I respect that argument, and I think it's important to think about.
Right. So when I mentioned this, I think so, because I said that I was going to talk to you. They said, "Oh, did you know that they did a podcast?" And yeah. So I know that there's a connection there.
He's my very next interview is Pete Bendick.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So I haven't met anybody else yet that. No, first of all, I haven't met anybody that's ever heard of that paper, which I think is really unfortunate because I think it's a cool paper, whether you agree with it or not.
I've heard of it. You met me.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So now there's one person.
Yeah, exactly.
But then also, like when I read the paper, it just felt like I was reading like someone, not like it's not like I had that as a developed view, and then I read it and was like, oh yeah, that's what I think. It was more like I had this really much more jumbled idea that like I think I'm an illusionist, but they're kind of seeing something off here. And then when I read that, I was like, okay. And then immediately I was like, I accept that. I understand that because that's taking an even more extreme view than Dennett, that nobody is going to agree with that. So I haven't met anybody that agrees with it yet when I brought it up. Like, as far as I know, I'm the only one. So
well, Pete agrees with it.
It wouldn't surprise me if he had written it and then not agreed with his own paper.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So apparently there's two of us.
Lance, did you read?
Be happy to know that.
Did you read his book Consciousness Explained and actually think that it was explained?
Yeah, pretty much.
Really?
Yeah, I know people mock that and call it consciousness explained away or whatever.
I know.
No, I think Dennett did a fantastic job there and elsewhere.
Wow. I got into philosophy because I wanted to disagree with Dennett. The only reason I'm here was I read Dennett as an undergraduate. I was like, oh, what are they saying over there? No, hell no, no. I'm anti-illusionism even more than I'm anti-realism about ethics. I think illusionism on conscience is a total disaster.
It would be pretty interesting if psychology underlied so much more than we think, because I feel like Richard and I actually have weirdly similar backgrounds in certain senses. And I, as a young person, deeply despised everything that Dennett said, and it motivated me to learn about philosophy.
Wow. So am I like the arch nemesis to both of you?
No, Dennett's not a nemesis. I mean, I've never met him in person, but I worked with him online. He gave a talk at my conference and had tons of emails with him and stuff, and whatever. I think he's a nice guy, super nice guy, smart guy. And in fact, the one thing I learned in the course of studying philosophy was that how clever and how good the arguments are and how interesting they are. Whereas before I just thought they were absurd. Like I read Quine and Qualia, I was like, burn this shit. This is fucking trash. But then I came to appreciate, actually, it was quite subtle. It depends on verificationalism. And, maybe you could criticize that, but it's not trash. It's not garbage. It's interesting. So I respect Dennett. I think not only do I respect him as a philosopher, I think he's a good person. I think he's kind-hearted and means well, and generally has had a good influence on the field of philosophy. I think there are negative qualities as well, that maybe he's had some negative influence, like he can be kind of glib and cavalier and dismissive and of views that he doesn't really seem to understand, in my opinion. But that's all of us. So yeah, I'm not a Dennett hater, but of the person, but I certainly was like his philosophical views. I thought was just like pure word games, like worse than anything I've ever seen from like compatibilists trying to redefine free will. It's like, this is just bull. So I wouldn't say arch nemesis, but yes, I think we've already established that our views are pretty polarly opposed.
Sure. So I would assume then, like you would almost by extension have to disagree with like qualia quietism even more.
Yeah. No, I like Pete too, but totally consciousness hater for someone who likes consciousness so much.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw an interview with you and Pete where Pete was going, "Don't you ever sit and just think about consciousness and go, wow?"
I know he loves consciousness, but he hates it too.
Interesting. All right. Well, it's really great talking to you guys. Sorry if things got heated a little sometimes. I mean, that wasn't my fault.
No, I didn't mean to come off in a bad way. I'm sure I did, but I actually enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot actually from talking to you, Lance, and thinking through these issues. So I appreciate your patience and kindness. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks. I thought this was a good discussion. I know that there was like some tension there early on, but I've watched a few discussions, like your discussion with King B and a few other people, and I've seen that you get a little combative with people, but it's something I've commented on because I talked about us having a conversation. As I said, I kind of like that. I've habituated myself from being in academia for so long to being kind of like a little too passive, and I think a little bit of combativeness is like, to me, is an indication that someone cares about the topic. You don't have to be
in a way, but also I agree. Thank you for saying that. But certainly I've tried to be less combative. I used to be way worse. Oh, I was a fucking asshole.
Well, so did I. I just think I overcorrected. Like I used to say, like, you're an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
I overcorrected in the opposite direction. And now I'm too willing to just be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm wrong, or I'm not going to say something about it. Like I get too docile. I don't want to be that way. So I'm trying to move back to being a little bit more combative.
Yeah, and also I would like to distinguish like good natured combativeness from like mean spirited. So maybe we did have a little back and forth that was less, more pointed or whatever. But I'm sick right now. I don't know. You don't know me, but normally I don't know if I have this low of affect normally or not, but I don't think I do. I felt pretty like depleted, but I felt like the exchange was interesting, and no one was taking anything personally, so I don't think it got too heated. But
I think you should have done.
I don't like people. So I don't think we should. So this kind of healthy combativeness is good. This thank you for your talk and this sort of thing is a little bit annoying, and it would be nice to see people be more open and honest. But it's also important to realize not everyone enjoys that, and so having some sensitivity to the norms of our discipline and not being an asshole all the time is good. But sometimes standing up for yourself and telling that person to fuck off is fun too. So I think this was a fun exchange.
This debate would have been better if you had done that power move where you blow the vape into the camera. You were doing the
was I doing that?
Yes, in the cane debate, you kept blowing the vape.
Power move,
and it was like a real tough guy look. It made you like you were always like bathed in smoke.
Cool. It's vape, not smoke.
Right, vape smoke. All right.
Well, I have the vape, but my lungs hurt.
All right. Well, let's leave on that note of your lungs hurting.
All right. See y'all later.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Lance. So someday I owe you a beer for this.
Oh, great. Thanks.